Brian Johnson. That's so funny. Who knows?
I am the king of nighttime erections. I go to bed thinking about myself, and I wake up thinking about myself. There's a big erection in between.
Oh man.
Let your winners ride.
Rain Man David Sachs.
And it's said we open source it to the fans, and they've just gone crazy with it.
Love you, Besties. Queen of Quinoa. All right, everybody, welcome back to the #1 podcast in the world. Man, we're starting off with 3 of the 4 original band members. Chamath Palihapitiya, he's your chairman dictator. The Sultan of Science, David Freeberg. And of course, I'm your host, Jason Calacanis. And David Sachs from the original band will be on the second half of the show. We're going to do some of the classics. Yes, we'll get some of the classics, including Ukraine, coming up on the second half of the show in our Greatest Hits Revival Tour. But with us again, sitting in the red throne, is the one, the only. Joe Lonsdale is back. He is, if you can imagine, further right than Keith Raboy and Sachs. They tell him to pump the brakes. Welcome back to the program, Joe Lonsdale. How you doing, brother?
Hey, Jason. Doing great here in Texas today.
Ah, yes. I see you right over the hill on the ranch. Our ranches are within 20 minutes of each other. Joe Lonsdale and I are shooting guns at our ranches.
Are you on a ranch, Joe?
Well, I bought a bunch of the homes and connected them, so it's kind of like a ranch, but it's actually a suburb. Yeah.
It's more like a compound. He has a compound.
Suburb.
That creaking sound you hear are the libs rolling in the guillotines. Yes, he bought the small town he lives in. Joe Lonsdale's here. Of course, he is a venture capitalist, the founder of 8VC. They've got $6 billion in AUM, co-founded Palantir, OpenGov, and Adapar. $3 billion plus companies he co-founded. And an early investor in Anduril. I'm in the market for secondary shares. You know how to reach me, folks. If you're selling your secondary in Anduril and building a position for obvious reasons, and Oculus, Wish, Oscar Health, amongst his other investments. Hey, what was the feedback, Joe, on your first appearance here on the All In Pod?
People loved it. You guys gave me no warning, so I was like on a mobile phone sideways, but it worked out. It was great. Everyone saw it. I guess it looks like people actually watch your show, Jason. It was surprising.
Apparently, people tune in from time to time, and that's why we call it the #1 podcast in the world. How are you doing, Chamath Palihapitiya? How are you doing, brother?
I'm doing really well.
Okay. Once again, giving me a ton to work with there. And Friedberg.
What would you like to know? Why don't you ask me a question?
Oh, well, I asked you how you're doing. Maybe you say, I had a great time with my kids. I took them to Disneyland, or I don't know, chef made an amazing arugula. You used to give me some color to work with here. So
Nat was in Rome all last week.
Great. What was she doing in Rome?
She had to go see her factory. She also had to go and renew her visa at the U.S. Embassy there.
Okay, so she's renewing her visa. Hopefully she'll be able to get back in the country. I know we've tightened up the borders.
Well, she's on an EB2 visa. But she should switch to this EB5 as soon as it's announced.
Ooh, yes, you can get the golden visa. And I think you already put a down payment on. Freeberg, how was your week? How's everything going at Ohalo? You having a productive week?
As one of my management team members told me today, it's a very complex business. That's usually not a good sign when the conversation starts with that.
Is that a way of saying everything's...
No, we were good. I was on the road this week. I just got back.
I mean, it's hard. Running a business is hard. You hire the smartest people you know, and what happens? They bring you all the problems they can't solve. So it's never easy. We've got an incredible docket today. Let's just start with, I'll give you a quick recap, boys, of the week since we last taped. To say the zone was flooded, in the words of Steve Bannon, would be an understatement. Here's your Trump tsunami for the week. Thursday, when we taped, the Epstein file dump fiasco. You remember that, Joe, right? Big zero, big nothing burger. Then, Friday, Zelensky was dressed down and kicked out of the White House by the vice presidents. Markets collapsed. They rebounded. On Saturday, we got a beautiful day off. Video of Trump dancing down a catwalk to YMCA. Maybe he played some golf. He was at the White House South, Mar-a-Lago. Sunday, 9:24 a.m. Eastern, the president pumps 3 specific cryptos, Solana, Cardano, XRP, to be in the first government strategic crypto reserve. Joe Lonsdale starts tweeting. I start tweeting. Everybody's tweeting. He quickly retweeted himself, included Ethereum and Bitcoin, some decentralized coins. Reaction was, wow, crazy. You had a little bit of a spicy take, Joe. We'll get into that later. And I'm sure our friend David Sachs will have much to say in the second half of the program. But it was pretty negative. Cardano ripped 70%, XRP 32%, Solana 25%. And then there was this crazy trade. One whale went 50 times long on BTC and ETH, $200 million position on just a $4 million investment. Everybody trying to figure out who that was. I'll leave it to you to speculate. Then we start the week. Monday, Trump says significant tariffs with Canada and Mexico. The market collapsed. He walks back tariffs a couple of hours later, and the market starts to rebound. Then at 2:38 p.m., Trump announces a $100 billion investment from TSMC in American fabs. Huzzah for that. And our boy David Sachs gets dragged out to the podium for a quick 15-second cameo. Very nicely done to our boy David Sachs. And then Tuesday, we have the most chaotic State of the Union I've ever seen. Highlights include an angry man shaking a cane and getting kicked out. There were some auction paddles from the libs. I don't know what they were bidding on. There were 13 Biden mentions and 1 Pocahontas. Wednesday, we have news that the DOGE blitz might slow down. Supreme Court chimed in with a 5-4 decision backing the federal judge who ordered the Trump admin to pay out $2 billion for USA contractors. Then there was a closed-door meeting with the Senate, with Elon. Maybe they discussed an approval process, maybe some voting type things. And then here we are today, Thursday, when we're taping. Market's down 2% on more tariff news. Breaking news drops at 11:30. Trump announced tariffs are off for Mexico. Markets aren't rebounding. We might be leaving NATO. Hold on, I'm almost there.
Yeah.
Breaking. We might be leaving NATO. Breaking. We're shutting down the Department of Education. Psych. We just found out we're not. Okay, gentlemen, that's the week that was.
No, there's 3 things that are also kind of interwoven in all of this. OpenAI dropped GPT 4.5, and I think it was not really that well received.
I didn't even know. Nobody's talking about that.
Quen, which is the open source Alibaba, dropped a rev, which seems actually really best in class. So that was really interesting.
Okay.
Then there was a story that said Llama is going sideways.
Facebook's open source LLM. Yeah.
And then the markets have just been going, I think, the craziest I've actually seen in 20 years of following the markets. And specifically, you're seeing the Mag 7 compress towards the rest of the S&P 500. And then you're seeing this insane trade away from Europe. So there's a ton that happened this week.
I mean, I don't remember a more eventful week. Joe, is this a little too much, maybe?
You guys missed the Shalom Hamas tweet by Trump, too, which for a lot of us is a big deal. He said, I don't know if this is hello or goodbye, but he's threatening them really strongly. So for people who care about that part of the world, it's interesting to watch what's going to happen.
So that also happened, yeah.
Oh, my Lord. Well, and shalom is hello and goodbye, right? Just to clarify, as a word, you would say it both, right?
Shalom.
Yeah.
It's ambiguous.
And peace.
Ambiguous word. And peace.
Yeah.
Well, maybe he's leaving it into interpretation. Maybe they get to pick. Maybe it's hello.
No,
peace.
that's what he wrote in the tweet.
Oh, he did. Yeah, it's your choice. Okay. It's a choose your own adventure, Hamas, from the President of the United States. But I think we should probably get into tariffs. This is confounding to most people. Maybe since I just did the whole rundown, I won't go into all the details about tariffs again. But just looking at it from first principles, Joe, I asked a couple of group chats. You're in one of them, in fact. And I have about 400 people total in these 4 group chats. What's the strategy here? What do you think Trump is trying to accomplish? And man, I got a range of answers. Let me ask you, what is Trump, in your estimation, trying to accomplish with the tariffs on, the tariffs off, the tariff ons, the tariffs off? As Chamath said here, this is creating more chaos than any of us have ever seen in the markets.
Listen, Trump's negotiating, right? So I actually ran into David Sachs. Each senator gets one guest. We were both guests in the Senate dining hall, hanging out with a bunch of these guys. Multiple of the guests, some of them were spouses of the senators. Multiple of the guests were people who'd lost kids to fentanyl, right? And so it's a very serious issue. It's a big thing on the populist right, as it should be for all Americans. We've lost, tens of thousands of young people recently to fentanyl, and Canada has done nothing about their border. And so, you just reported breaking news. I hadn't even heard yet that Mexico might be off. Canada's still on. He's using this to negotiate. So I talked to the senators and I asked them what's going on, because obviously I import things all over the place. I'd like to know what the hell the rules are. But he wants people to actually crack down on this stuff and save American lives. And I think that's a reasonable thing to use to negotiate and force them to do that.
Okay, so you believe it's negotiation because of the fentanyl issue. Chamath, let me go to you, because many people are saying this has more to do with some great reset and maybe the 10-year. Do you think this is about fentanyl at the border or something else?
I think that this is the first week where I've seen the first real schism in how people are interpreting what's actually happening. I think that Trump and Elon were very much in a honeymoon period until this week. And I think there was the benefit of the doubt. But what I saw on X was a real divergence where, on the one hand, there were people that were basically saying, DOGE is deranged, Elon is crazy, Trump is lighting the world on fire in one camp, and the other camp saying he's sticking to the plan. And when I thought about this a little bit, if you went back to November the 5th, I do think it's important to remember that we were at this moment where you had this fork in the road and you had all these important issues where I think the best way to generalize it was that the Democrats believed that the lines should continue to be blurred. So whether that was on gender or race or merit versus some other immutable trait or fiscal and monetary policy, things were just getting more and more blurred. And then Trump and Elon basically showed up and said, actually, we want to refocus and we want to make the lines very visible and clear on all those dimensions. And a majority of Americans voted that in. But I think what you're starting to see now is the difficulty in actually implementing that plan. And what I mean specifically is tariffs are very nuanced and complicated. On the one hand, there's these short-term wins. There's these impacts. You could deem them positive or negative to the dollar. There's impacts to U.S. bonds. There's impacts to U.S. bond markets. There's impacts to how countries deal with foreign reserves. And then there's this impact that happens when the markets react to a tariff. And then Trump takes that off the table and then they snap back. So you have this weird set of boundary conditions right now. So I think right now we're in the very difficult part of sorting through what the long-term implications are. And I can get to some of them later, but I think that's where we are.
I think that's really interesting. The goal of tariffs in your mind for Trump is fentanyl?
No.
Finance related?
No. It's
give me your definitive what you think this is about.
I think what tariffs allow us to do is rebase the long-term reliance on the US dollar. It allows us to rebase our ability to fund our own deficits. And it allows us to rebase the long-term ability for American companies to be economically vibrant.
Okay. So, Freeberg, we got one person with fentanyl at the border negotiating. We got one person on trade. Some portion of this I hear, and when I asked in these 4 group chats, I got, he's throwing stuff at the wall, the border, he's trolling, the 10-year note, and he doesn't care about stocks. And then I got onshoring and manufacturing as a possibility. We're going to make it more expensive to bring things in, so why don't you consider making stuff here? Do you think that third possibility is what's going on here? Does David Freeberg pick one of these 3 choices or another? What's going on here with tariffs specifically?
I don't sit inside of Trump's head, and I don't have any direct line of communication to folks that are constructing the theory and the policy. If I were to say, what's the most masterful plan in an optimistic way of what could be going on here? What's the master plan? I would kind of craft it as follows. Tariffs aren't being done in isolation. They're being done along with a coordinated policy effort to reduce income taxes and another policy effort to reduce government spending. So those are 3 actions, 3 legs on a stool. So tariffs, reduced income taxes, reduced government spending. And they are related to each other. They're related to each other because if we increase tariffs, one element of that is that to import products is more expensive for example, I buy LED lights in my greenhouse. And the price of the LED lights just went up by 25%. This week, I actually spoke with the CEO of an LED company, and I was like, why don't you guys make the LEDs here? And there starts to become a crossover point where it actually makes economic sense for the company to make the LEDs here instead of sourcing them from Asia. And there's 100,000 examples of this. When the industrial supply chain goes to the lowest part of production, it's going to end up offshoring when there's no tariffs. And if there are tariffs, then you start to do production here. So you're increasing both kind of security for the US supply chain, but also increasing demand and creation of a workforce. Now, I think that the income tax piece is critical here because in order to make the capital available to build that industry here, we need to unleash capital. And reducing of income taxes, the economic theory would be that capital will now flow into these entrepreneurial activity, these opportunities that have emerged, where suddenly it makes sense for me to make textiles, to make metals, to make materials, to make cars, to make all this stuff here in the United States that I otherwise wouldn't be making. So both the corporate and the personal income tax, by reducing it, unleashes capital that instead of going into the government, it now goes into the private sector, into building businesses.
Okay.
I think that there's another theory about this, which is as you drop the income tax, one of the kind of key theories that I've heard spoken about a lot lately, and I think we're going to hear about it a lot more this year, is trying to get the United States to move away from an income taxation model to a consumption taxation model. So effectively what the tariffs do is there's a tax for you buying certain things. So now instead of getting taxed when you earn money as an individual, you get taxed when you spend money. And some people think that that's both a more fair system and a more kind of economically vibrant system because that will drive investment in the things that people want to produce because the money's going into production. So
do you think that? Do you think that, Freeberg? I'm curious.
I don't know. It's a really interesting economic theory. I mean, I am not opposed to seeing some sort of an experiment play out where we look at a shift from income taxation to consumption taxation and see if it actually does have an effect on economic growth and productivity. It has not been done in 150 years. There's a lot of economic theorists on both sides of the equation saying this does work or it doesn't work.
Okay.
And let me just say one last thing. By reducing government spending, we are moving workers from the government into the private workforce. So as those new industries pop up, as those investments start to get made in building new industry onshore, where are the workers going to come from? Remember, the government's 30% of the US GDP today. So if that's not a great way to invest money, maybe the private industry is better at investing money and employing people. That will unleash the workforce and it will counterbalance the inflation that we're experiencing. So there's a lot of inflation because of tariffs. And by reducing government spending, that's the offset to inflation. So those three actions, I think, are three legs of a stool, and they actually are all interrelated to one another. So that would be my grand master theory of what might be going on.
This is an interesting triangulation theory that people have been speculating about. And there are a couple of caveats here, Joe. Number one, we do have lowering income tax and lowering services experiment. It's called Florida, Texas, and a couple of the states where they have lower income tax and more consumption tax. We pay a lot more in real estate taxes here, something we consume. Putting that aside, the really interesting issue is we're at the lowest unemployment of our lifetime, 4%. Where are all these workers going to come from? What do you think, Joe, now that you've heard the two other panelists here discuss it? What are we trying to get to? Where is the destination at the end of this term? Trump's lame duck. He can go wild here. He's not running for re-election. And, you know, what do you think he wants to see? Do you think he just wants to cement some sort of legacy? And if so, what's that legacy? And how do these actions equal his goals and legacy?
No, listen, I agree with what David was saying, Jason. And it's a really important point also that we should mention is that the last 4 years, the economy's looked okay, but part of that is because government's been hiring like mad. And so the point he made is that actually, you know, having twice as many people, you know, harassing me. I just got back yesterday, no action on an audit they've been harassing me on for 3 years. They found nothing. Having twice as many people doing things like that and or like, you know, running TSA or pushing papers around in the Department of Labor doesn't actually add output to the economy. And so, you know, it does seem like it makes a lot of sense. Let's take 1 million workers out of the consulting class around DC, out of the, you know, paper pusher class around DC, and let's actually deploy them to the actual productive economy. Elon and Trump have both been saying that. I think David's 100% right. And it is true. A lot of my companies, thanks to the tariff stuff, are looking to build stuff here. So I'm not a huge fan of tariffs personally, but they definitely make sense for things in defense. They definitely make sense for negotiating with countries. And it is true. It is pushing certain people, including me, to build some more things in America.
Here's where tariffs make a lot of sense. If you have markets where there are domestic alternatives and or where things are fundamentally commodity, there's no reason why tariffs can't work to create the incentives to redomicile economic productivity inside of the United States. That's a slam dunk, I think.
And Chamath, there's another twist on that too, which I think we should all acknowledge, is that America does have some really tough environmental laws. Despite what Jason may think of me, I actually don't want my daughters growing up with messy air, messy water, screwed up country.
Oh, I don't think that of you. I know that you're a nature guy.
But
you're like a classic Bush nature guy.
But here's the thing. In China and Indonesia and all these other countries, they are just shitting over the environment as they make things. I think tariffs are very reasonable in that case. Like, it's not fair to make it more expensive for us because we're doing it well, and then we outsource it for them to destroy things, right? So there are some things there where it does make sense.
And what I would say is the other side of the tariff knife is that if there are markets, though, where you're making something that's fundamentally innovative, where you are but one maker, the problematic part of where tariffs really affect the U.S. consumer is then the price of that product, of which there are no competitive alternatives, can go very, very high. And that's inflationary. And I think that slows down consumption. And then if that consumption is not just of something that's a nice to have, but a must have, then it becomes problematic. And so you could see where tariffs could impact certain industries. For example, if there are innovative drugs, I think that's problematic. If there are innovative technologies of which there's only one vendor, that's problematic. So all of those need to get sorted out. But on balance, in commodity markets, like look at autos. Autos is a perfect example. There are so many purveyors and providers of autos. There's OEMs all around the world. And so to have a compensatory system doesn't seem like an unreasonable thing, where it's a tit-for-tat tariff. But in other markets where if you need, for example, a specific piece of equipment from ASML to build a chip, and now all of a sudden that machine is 25% more expensive or 30% more expensive, and they pass that cost downstream, it becomes very speculative and it becomes a little bit more fragile, I think.
This is dangerous though, right, Chamath? Because I agree with you in theory, but then there's something where, if everyone's lobbying for their thing to be an exception, you end up getting this very crony system that you don't necessarily want, right? So you have to be very careful how you define these things.
Exactly. Right. So this is why I think like sector by sector, you can probably go and pass the smell test and say, if there are multiple providers and or if it's somehow commodity, I think it's easier to absorb the tariff in the short term. Maybe that's the right way to say it, which is if Trump believes everything should be tariffed, then instead of debating if, to your point, maybe the right thing to debate is when. And you have to put some things on a much longer glide path so that you don't just create inflation out of nowhere and or you don't hold back American business or American consumers.
Well, this is a key point because you do need to have predictability to make investment and reciprocity. So really two important points Chamath's making here. One, on reciprocity. These things haven't been looked at for a while. I'm not sure how they got so out of whack, but just putting some facts to this, Chamath's exactly correct. We get placed, when we send cars to the EU, they get a 10% tariff, but when we get their cars, it's a 2.5% tariff. Who let it get out of whack? I'm not sure, but why not make the reciprocity perfect and just, hey, you say 10, we say 10, you say 2.5, we say 2.5. And that would make, I think, a lot more sense. Just to put some numbers here on government employees, it's not as bad as people make it out to be. A lot of our spending is non-employee related, but it is, if you look over the last two administrations, we have added 1.2 million, 1.3 million employees across all.
I disagree.
And hold on, let me just finish the sentence so you have the facts and then you can disagree with the facts. 1.3 million additional employees added. This does not include contractors. And so we don't know what USA was doing with NGOs and contractors. And I think that's where we do need to get some clarity. And to Chamath's point, this has all got to become predictable. You cannot put tariffs on, off every week, or else how does your friend, Dave, who wants to do the LED lighting, or you're encouraging to do LED lighting, know if they should build a factory and invest $10 million in that? You disagree with the number of employees? You want to address that?
Yeah, look,
okay, go ahead.
The government accounts for 30% of GDP in the United States. That's an extraordinary sum. So just
I was
because
talking just about the employees. That's a much smaller percentage.
But that doesn't matter. The direct employees of federal agencies is a fraction of people that are employed indirectly by government spending. This is super important.
Sure.
Because as we all know, many government agencies write checks to large contractors, subcontractors, and third-party service providers that do the work for them. So the money gets transferred. They then employ the people and they do the work. So it doesn't technically show up on federal government payroll registers, but these are people that are indirectly employed by federal spending. That's super important to acknowledge, that a large percentage of the U.S. workforce is indirectly supported by federal dollars.
Yeah, and it's gone up massively with the NGOs too. So you've had about 4 million people employed by contractors in DC, 1.6 million more at the states actually by federal spending, and then you have the NGOs. No one knows the NGOs. The Biden administration took down the data I used to see things in 2020, so we don't even know how much money, but we know it was hundreds of billions. And so it's pretty crazy. The number one thing about how DOGE is not being done fully is that Elon's doing an amazing job. Whether or not he cuts 500 billion or a trillion or a lot more, but the senators and the congressmen are not willing to take it out of their bill. Their reconciliation bill right now, they're talking about cutting 1 to 2 trillion. So rather than this is over 10 years.
It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
If it was equal to what Elon was doing, it'd be at least $5 trillion. And I push a bunch of them. They say, oh, the Congressional Budget Office and all these things. And I'm sure there's some tough things there, but this is crazy. We need to see what these cuts need to be on DOGE, and we need to cut 5 trillion. And none of these people have the balls to do that. There's not the political will to do it, is my interpretation.
And just
cojones. Let me just show you one chart to back that up. I have my new desgraciad.com for the week. Look at this, Chama. You want to talk about software and waste. 35,855, according to DOGE, breaking news, ServiceNow licenses on 3 products only being used by 84 people.
Oh my
in
God,
our government.
Are you kidding me?
11,000 Acrobat licenses with 0.0 users. Desgraciad! Absolutely abhorrent. And I'm saying it right now. I want an investigation into procurement. Who sold this? Who bought it? This could be a crime. This could be fraud. There could be kickbacks. I'm saying there could be.
I don't think it's
Number
that.
2.
But I do think you have to look at the earnings of these companies and question where's all of this.
Totally correct.
Number 2.
Totally correct.
If ServiceNow ever wants to work with the government again, Mr. President, our president, I want them to pay us back for the unused licenses. And I want a full audit for the last 10 years. If they don't pay us back that money and give us a credit,
hold on, listen.
Banned forever.
Hold on. It's not.
Thank you, Mr. President.
This may not be ServiceNow's fault. This may be the ineptitude of the people that bought the licenses.
Of course, but they should still give us a credit. I want the money back for the American people.
I do think Adobe has the worst. Have you guys ever done Adobe subscriptions? They're impossible to cancel. I think Adobe
11,000 with 0 users.
The only thing harder than canceling an Adobe license is trying to cancel Wall Street Journal.
I was about to say Wall Street Journal.
That's the worst.
All-time Hall of Fame.
Let me just say something about the budget because Joe brings up something important.
Unbelievable.
I'll just say it again at the sake of being redundant. We're getting to the phase where the details are complicated and they now matter. So we've talked about repealing the IRA in its totality, right? So that was a statement, and there's theoretically a lot of money there. But the details now all of a sudden become complicated. FERC published a report just this past week. And what do you think it said was the percentage of incremental electricity that was generated from renewables versus non-renewables? I'll tell you the answer. It was almost 91% in December. So if you now tie 2 huge initiatives together, which is how do we find a budget that saves money, and how do we continue to win in AI? Maybe you would have thought those weren't related. Well, guess what? We know that AI needs a tremendous amount of power. And whatever you thought you knew, actually, you had to re-underwrite because what Elon has shown is actually you need to now create these mega clusters, 100,000 GPUs going to 1 million GPUs. All of the power forecasting that we have is miscast. It doesn't even account for this. Number one. Number 2, there are 35,000 applications into FERC to get approved to generate electricity. 35,000. That's going to meander through some administrative rigmarole. There is a 5-year delay to get a gas turbine into America and online. Okay, if you ordered one today, The fastest that you can get it turned on is 2030. The fastest that you can get nuclear turned on is 2035. So we don't have the ability to generate incremental electricity very quickly, but for renewables. But then if you rip out the IRA, there's many parts of the IRA, by the way, that are just trash. Nick, I don't know if you can find it, but Barry Weiss found this insane thing that made me so angry, which I'm happy to talk about, which was like a 30-day grant process that resulted in a $7 billion grant to some shell NGO.
Oh, this was throwing the gold bars off the castle
but hold
the
on
last
a second.
day.
But the other part of the IRA, this narrow part, is what it did to reinforce tax incentives and tax equity, which is a $200 billion market that incentivizes that 90% of energy generation. So my point is that when you start to get into the details, when the House Ways and Means Committee has to figure out what part to put back, this is going to be hard because it's like, hold on, if you gut the whole thing, now all of a sudden you take 90% of the incremental energy generation incentives out of the market. You don't have enough electrons. There isn't enough electricity. So then you lose the AI race, or you start to lose it. I think the point is that we're now in the hard part where the details really matter.
Listen, you got to start with the chainsaw. We saw that at Twitter.
And by the way, Trump just tweeted,
and maybe you do. Like,
when we started this, he just tweeted this out. He said, "Guys, now it's time to get surgical." He said this.
Yes, that was the metaphor I was about to use. Is like, you start with, you cut out the goddamn ServiceNow and Adobe subscriptions, and then you work on something, more deft, and maybe that's where we are. IRA, just for the audience, Inflation Reduction Act.
Can I just do a rant on this pop-up NGO thing? To me, this is like the worst of America, and it makes me so angry. And I'll tell you my lived experience. So I'm on the other side of this. I started a company with these guys from Tesla to make battery materials in the United States in 2019. We grind. I put in tens of millions of dollars. We get a deal with a big OEM. And then you see these DOE grants. We spent millions of dollars. We file a very detailed plan to build battery metals and battery capacity in America. We got rejected. Okay. It was an entire year-long process. We got rejected. We put it past us. We kept working. We found more deals. We found a way to survive, raise a little bit more money. And then we applied again on some success, and we got a $100 million grant. Okay. That's what just happened this year. But then yesterday I read, and Nick, maybe you can throw this tweet up, this Barry Weiss investigation. Somebody in 30 days who was connected to the Democratic infrastructure had some shell organization that got a grant that was 70 times bigger than us. Like, we've made stuff. We have deals with OEMs. We had to validate it every step of the way. We were rejected once. So our process to get a $100 million DOE program was 2 years. These people showed up in 30 days and got $7 billion. That's just wrong.
Why didn't you lead with DEI or something? You would have gotten $1 billion. You just led with the wrong thing. You were actually providing a product or service people need.
This is why
you don't have any equity in there for the minerals.
This is why it's so frustrating to build for the government, guys. This is what Palantir and SpaceX had to deal with. That's why they both sued the government. Is that all the friends who used to be the CIO, used to be the general, made the right donations, had the right kid on the board. It's all corrupt. And then the actual substantive people, you have to work like hell.
How did they give $7 billion in 30 days? What could you...
We're going to find out.
You got a bunch of Democrat operatives on the board.
Let me challenge you guys on one point. There are now claims being made by reporters and by third parties that are saying it is a new form of kleptocracy, with all the friends of Silicon Valley installing their friends and agency heads as undersecretaries and so on. That's going to benefit Silicon Valley investors, Silicon Valley companies. Joe, Chamath, JCal, I mean, how do you guys react to the claims that there's now, this new kind of kleptocratic movement? It's the old guard is gone, but now there's a new guard that's going to...
You have Palantir, you have Anduril, so go ahead. You answer, Joe.
Let's talk about this. I mean, when I go to DC, what I am asking is I want there to be a fair competition. And if I win, I want my company to actually be able to win the contract, because the way it's worked for 20 years, like Epirus, you just raised $250 million this week. It's a great company. We had a big contest 4 years ago. L3, Raytheon, Northrop, these guys, in and out of government for decades. They've gotten tens of billions of dollars to the same technology area. When we went head to head with them, we didn't just beat them by a little bit. We shot down the hardened drones 9.5 times farther away. Same size, same power, 9.5 times, completely wiped the floor.
What was
And
the cost difference between the bids? Like, are you saving us
We-
massive money?
Massive money. I invested only 30, 40 in the whole thing at that point, and they've spent billions, and we have much cheaper, much better, not even a question. And you talk to like at the time, the chief of staff of the Air Force, the guy who wrote the 4-star, and he says, well, Joe, this was written 3 years ago. It looks like Raytheon probably did help write it, and they required all these things, and your way you're doing it. I'm like, yeah, I'm using a chip instead of a cathode ray tube. That's why it's working so much better. He's like, yeah, but it was written for the way they're doing it, and I could overrule it, but it'd break a lot of glass. So you'll probably win again in 3 years because everyone knows you're the best. But it's too it's too stressful to give it to you right now. Like that is that. So what I'm doing is I'm not going and saying give my companies money. I'm saying make this actually a functional, logical process and give me a chance to win it from the best. And that is 100 times better for our country to push
But then
it that way.
how do you make that transparent, and how do you avoid
Yeah, there has to be massive transparency.
how do you avoid the perception of conflict and the perception of kleptocracy?
Well, it's acquisition. Acquisition reform, right? So like this is a really important story. You guys probably know we were in the Philippine jungles in the early 1910s, needed new pistols. Our pistols were terrible. They had like a 1-page thing, what they needed. There's 6 arm manufacturers competed. That's how we got the Colt 1911 in like 3 months. It won by a large amount. It's an awesome gun. 12 years ago, we had a 700 something page document that the bureaucrats spent years on outlining what they needed for a new pistol. I probably needed to do DEI stuff. I have no idea. It's like this long comical document. They still don't have a new pistol today. And so the way we do it is we have a very clear process where it's very specific on the outcomes, not on the inputs, and you have a contest, and then you make sure that it's obvious who wins, guys. It's not like we're like slightly better. It's like we're shaming them. So the only way they can stop us is by playing these games because we're just so much better.
I think that if you're in the administration or if you join some part of the administration, whether you're a full-time employee or a GSE or just a volunteer, there's going to be that perception of impropriety or influence peddling. That comes with the territory. So how do you avoid it? And I think that Joe is exactly right. When the administration was getting formed, one of the things that happened, I had an opportunity to work with some of the folks to write some proposals for what theoretically could happen in some of these bigger government organizations where there's just huge pockets of spend. And where I spent most of my time is what Joe talked about. How do you create open standards so that it's very clear what the competition is, so that the rules on the ground can't get manipulated by people who are rolling out of government into private industry, or somebody has a very deep relationship because of lobbying. Those are the things that pervert the clarity of what should happen, because then what happens can be far afield of that. So number one is, I think, knowing that this time around, a different class of people are going to be seen on the quote unquote popular side. It's really critical that all of us that are involved in this promote extremely transparent, open standards. Publish every RFP, publish every spec, publish every evaluation criteria, make these things as mechanistic as possible. So for example, if you're going to go and field a drone, there's an incredibly detailed set of data that you should be publishing in. It's not dissimilar to how an FAA asks for flight test data. And you should be able to review that so that then it can be escalated, so that if somebody then gets a deal because of preference and you think you're structurally better on the data, there needs to be an escalation and a release valve that says, hold on, this is just being manipulated. And I think that's how you fight back on not just this version of a potential winning side versus losing side, but forever in the future. The government should be open. The government should be transparent. And every single point at which they're making a decision and giving money should be measurable and known.
You guys got it exactly right. There's transparency. There's oversight, obviously. But there's whistleblowers as well. And there's the role of the press in all of this to sort of fact check it and to check in on it as a safeguard with the public getting engaged. And that's one of the great things that DOGE has done. By having a Twitter handle, I can pull up, hey, here's what's going on with these licenses and make an example. So that kind of transparency helps. And then finally, we have to look at campaign finance. That is where a lot of the appearance of impropriety exists.
Go back to this other thing, because that's a super important point. Like, it just occurred to me that if what you said happens, then look, the incentive today in America is to try to position oneself to have one of these roles. And the reason is because, David, of what you said, there is the chance to then preferentially nudge an opportunity your way, right?
Yes.
Why do people sit on committees? Why do people volunteer? At least at that level. And if you introduce open standards, then the real incentive to want to go do this should be because you actually are patriotic and want to just help.
So Chamath, I think you're right about the standards, but I want to push back on the incentive today. I know a lot of the people who are getting into this, and I really do think they're there to fight for the country. I don't just say this as naively or something. Like, these people really are there for the right reasons for the most part.
No, I know. I'm just saying generally over like the last 50 years, if you look at people, there is this implied sense. Like, for example, like Goldman Sachs had a direct line to become Treasury Secretary. If you were the CEO of Goldman, you were the Treasury Secretary. Now, don't you think that was discussed amongst partners at Goldman? And do we not think on the margins that beneficially helped Goldman? Of course it did. We'd be naive to think otherwise. My point is not that. My point is just that going forward, the best thing all of our friends could do is just make it all open source and open standards. Yeah. That would be an incredible artifact, I think, for America.
Joe, I think you telling us, hey, I trust these people, they're our friends, that works with all of us because, yes, we know them. We know they're going to do the stand-up right thing. And if you already have a ton of money, like some incremental amount of money is not going to move the needle for you. It's farcical for us to think that David Sachs is going to give up 4 years of income producing, have to sell all his positions, and that is in some way good for his balance sheet. It is not. He's going to miss out on 4 years of AI and the massive run-up of our lifetime in order to serve the country. But I can tell you, people don't believe that. Just like, you talked about the kleptocracy and the revolving door to Raytheon or whoever that people have talked about forever. What you need is whistleblower protections, journalists going after this, like Barry Weiss is doing, old school journalism, investigative. The whistleblower laws are great in our country. We need to keep reinforcing those. But I'm going to go back to, we need to limit campaign contributions. We have to get rid of super PACs because these create the appearance of impropriety. And the appearance of impropriety with Trump's meme coin and that announcement on Sunday for the crypto reserve was, it doesn't help the mission here that Trump is trying to get done. So maybe you could speak to that because that's where the appearance of impropriety is great. You got people like Saylor who's doing his Bitcoin thing. He's going on Friday and, Sachs will do a little bit here and announce some stuff on the program, hopefully. But maybe you could talk about what you objected to with the coins, the meme coin, and or the announcement of the crypto reserve. Should our government, and after all this donations from massive people, like I saw at the crypto ball, all the people who were tweeted by Trump, that looks terrible. You tell me what to think.
I agree with you on that tweet. You're sneaking two things together here, though. So I want to be really precise, Jason, because
let's be precise. That's what we do here.
There are a lot of different possible ways that people can help politicians. And so one of them is if you're a celebrity, like even on your guys' show at this point, you can affect what people think. That's really powerful.
Say more.
And there's other ways that if you're part of a big union, if you're part of a government union, that's very powerful. Influence in our society. If you're part of the American Medical Association healthcare system, the doctors and health systems are very powerful, even without super PACs in our society. And what a super PAC is, it's a form of free speech. And it's true, wealthy people have the ability to influence things through that speech, but it's like one of many. And so if you're cutting that, you're basically saying, okay, I don't want Elon and Joe to have as much say there, but I do want to have even more say for the celebrities and for the doctors and for the union members and government. So you have to realize you're dealing with a complicated situation with lots of forms of power. I do agree with you. As I said, and listen, I saw David and we gave each other a hug. I think we're all good, but I was very frustrated with posts of Trump mentioning specific coins. I don't know who was trading them before. It just looks bad. Like, we're fighting all this grift, we're doing all these things where we have the moral high ground. I agree. I don't want to give up the moral high ground with these silly schemes. That's 100% the case.
Are you saying with there's many forms of influence that you think super PACs and rich people should be able to?
I think speech is important.
Make $50 million, $20 million donations. You actually think that's fair for democracy? And
I actually think speech is very important. I think the ability for me to send out something and say, guys, I'm studying this. It's corrupt. It's been corrupt for 50 years. We have to all get together and stand against these health systems, these crazy defense companies that have captured and broken everything. Like, I think my ability to speak and do that and to convince people is really valuable. And I pass dozens of laws each year in these different states by convincing people, nothing to do with making me money, that these incentives and accountability are wrong. I think that's a good thing that I'm allowed to do that.
Should there be a cap? So when you say speech, you mean write a check. You mean it's not very large checks.
You have to be careful. So the reason the Supreme Court ruled for super PACs is not just about you're not giving them the money. You're actually speaking yourself. So when Elon spends $300 million, he's actually spending it many times putting out his own speech, or he's putting out
So
his
you believe that should
people
be
to go.
legal? What about you, Chamath?
Yeah.
You think that Soros, Elon, let's take the names out of it. Do you think there should be a cap on what you're able to donate to super PACs? Because this does create the massive appearance of impropriety, whether it's in crypto, whether it's on the, Soros on the Democrat side. This seems to be, I'm in favor of there being more hard caps, whether it's 5, 10, or 25 million. I think there needs to be caps. And I think we should put a fund together for the last 2 or 3 people and let them get that money from the government to run their campaigns like other countries do.
I think it's important to note that this pendulum has swung pretty wildly out of whack since Citizens United.
Yeah.
And this is not a Republican thing, meaning there's a whole bunch of factions. There's the George Soros faction.
Yeah.
That's true. There's the liberal Democrat faction. Lest we forget, I think Zuck spent $350 million in 2020.
Oh, yeah.
Then there's the Koch brothers faction. And then there's what showed up this year with Elon. So my point is there's all kinds of pockets of spending in all manner of ways. I think the question is, should Citizens United have allowed this kind of spending? And are we better off as a democracy for it? And I think
what does Chamath think?
The reason why I would be in favor of going back to the way it was is that I think the biggest problem is the redistricting and the gerrymandering that happens and the amount of influence that happens downstream inside of state and local elections. And there are just places that are just so sclerotically stuck. If you look at the federal, despite all the spending, you still see at the presidential level like pretty reasonable and healthy competition between 2 people. It's much more difficult to see dynamism lower and lower down ballot. And so the reason to get rid of Citizens United, from my perspective, is that you'd have much more vibrant local, state, mayoral elections. Those things have huge impacts, I think, to quality of life.
So you and I are in that camp. Joe's in the other. Freeberg, your thoughts. You're the deciding vote here. It's 2-1 in terms of the panel.
It's not 2-1. It's not 2-1.
Well, you just said to me you think we should go back.
This is
the way it was.
The Supreme Court's on my side, so you guys are in trouble.
Exactly.
Well, no. Yeah, but the point of this program sometimes is not just to take ownership of your opinion and defend it. So I want to see people own it here in the discourse. Or Freeberg, you can say pass, but you don't get to say nothing.
Okay. What does it mean to spend money on a political point of view?
Exactly.
What does it mean?
It means you can put a book. I mean, the other side wanted to censor books.
That's the thing. If I want to pay someone to make a book for me, if I want to pay 50 people to go and engage the community so I can get some leverage on my time, if I want to pay someone to make a website to promote my point of view on something, I should be able to do that. And if my point of view is related to a vote that Congress might be taking, or is related to a candidate that's running for election, or is related to taxes, or is related to some other social issue, I don't know how you can kind of very clearly delineate the difference between some kind of political party or some political candidate versus my having a point of view on an issue. If I care very deeply about animal welfare, which I do, and if I had enough money that I felt like I could spend that money to influence people's point of view, to improve animal welfare through laws and through candidates, I would spend that money. And I should have a right to do so. And I shouldn't feel restricted that I can't go publicly express my voice, make websites, put up billboards, put up posters, buy ads in papers telling people how wrong it is the way we treat animals and slaughter them and keep them living for their very short lives in terrorist conditions. I want to be able to express that point of view. And so I kind of veer to this idea
Can I ask you a question? Do you think that your money spending, if the balance of power to get your view was to redistrict certain places so that then you could get a majority of people that were ideologically aligned to you elected, would you do that as well? Forget, there's no ads running. This is about a different form of electoral influence. Would you do that?
So not spending money, you're saying? Like I'm not spending money to...
You'd spend money, but it's not for ads. It's not for posters.
But how does that work? How do you spend money to redistrict?
You get certain people elected by trucking people out to vote, and then you get that person to join a coalition that then redistricts.
I mean, maybe trucking people out to vote as an action should be illegal. That seems pretty reasonable to me.
Well, yeah, I mean, to your point, Freeberg, you asked, like, how do you define it?
What I'm trying to point out to you is for every dollar that goes into politics, I would ask you guys to just suspend belief that 100% of that goes to ads. No, what I'm trying to say is,
yeah, I hear you.
I would say not a very small, 10 to 20 cents goes to ads, 80% goes to all kinds of shady stuff.
And there's also canvassing.
By the way, you call it shady, but I would argue, like, what if I want to make a bunch of websites? What if I want to make, like, have people go out and express the point of view in the town square? Like, there are other aspects of what you might...
What I'm saying is that's fine. That's in the 10-cent bucket. The 80 cents, what I'm trying to tell you explicitly is how it's spent today is not in the ways that you think.
I think that the fact that someone calls it shady might be because they disagree with my point of view. And if they agree with my point of view, they might not call it shady.
I think the tactics today, look, I play with the conditions on the field, but if you look at them, meaning like using dollar incentives to incentivize people, that's allowed today. You can pay people to vote today.
You can pay them to join a super PAC or something like that. But hold on, let me just get Joe involved here. So Joe, you heard Freeberg's. You're kind of in alignment, I think, broadly.
Yeah.
But we can define some very specific things that are obviously political, like the window of when you spend the money.
Mm-hmm.
Like
why?
Telling people, well, because you could say in the year
I'm
leading up to the election.
What if I'm not targeting a specific vote?
I get it. If you're targeting an issue, that's one thing. But when you tell people she's for they, them, he's for you, that's clearly a political ad. Now you could take those ads, you could take canvassing, you could define a subset of behaviors, and you could say you can raise up to this amount of money per person in that way. That to me, those things are explicitly political when you tell people this is about candidate A versus candidate B. If you were to say this, we're not going to mention any candidates, but we're going to talk about your puppies and you trying to increase your Q score here on the goddamn pod by saving puppies.
Animal welfare is a fucked up issue, and it's something that you shouldn't just dismiss like that. I happen to be
agreeing with you. I just don't like how many points you're scoring with the audience over
Did you guys see this thing on Instagram? My wife showed it to me.
Ridiculous. I'm going to save 5 puppies from my ranch. Somebody save some cows.
Did you guys see this Instagram reel? My wife showed it to me. It's like of a calf chasing a dog. And it cuts to this Asian guy and he's like, what's the big deal here? What are we talking about? Like, you want us to not eat everything, blah, blah, blah. And then he realizes that they're talking about the dog versus the calf.
Don't trigger Freeberg. Don't do that. Leave Freeberg alone. Freeberg, I got 33 acres of paradise. Don't laugh. I got 33 acres of paradise. I'm going to save every animal in Central Texas. Go ahead.
I'm going to eat them.
And I would give you money to do that.
Yeah. Okay. Great. I got a deal.
No, I agree with what Chamath was saying about gerrymandering. I think we could use AI for that. It's a separate conversation. It's discussing how it works right now. However, Jason, the problem at the end of the day with defining what's political or not is the boundary cases are really tough, and you do end up needing effectively a censorship board. Example is I write a book about the dangers of communism, and it explains how it's linked to things going on today. And I give it out at all these people who are going to be voting. I mean, there's just so many boundary cases.
Yeah, but if we just said you can spend up to $10 million a year doing political activity. $10 million a year gives you a cap, so you can only buy so many books and buy so many ads.
This is not political activity. It's my art. This is an artistic piece about communism.
But when you put the book in and say vote for Biden, then we would say, okay, you put a vote for Biden.
But you see what I'm saying, though? It becomes really complicated.
I just ran it through Grok. And what the answer was is that 56% of all the spending happens to be on ads, and 44% of all dollars in 24-25 was spent on other.
Yeah.
So there's
if you put canvassing in there, I bet you it's 75%. Yeah. So if we just say for those two activities, put a hard cap on them, I would be for that. But let's keep going. We got a bunch of tech.
I want to talk about the market. Market's
Let's talk about CoreWeave.
All right, gentlemen, we can't talk about politics all day, as exciting as it is. Let's talk about this CoreWeave IPO. If you don't know, CoreWeave is part of a new type of infrastructure provider called NeoCloud. It's a fancy way of saying using GPUs to build data centers. This is a really interesting company because they got onto GPUs early and they had a lock-in on a large number of NVIDIA's GPUs. They've got 32 data centers with 250,000 NVIDIA GPUs. As an example, when Elon built the largest, fastest data center, Colossus, that was 100,000. So this is, really, really a big company. They're going to do an IPO. Analysts are estimating they're going to raise at least $3.5 billion at over $30 billion. Their secondary was $23 billion. in November of 2024. So this is cooking with oil. They've got incredible revenue, by the way, 1.9 billion in 2024. But if you look at 2 years ago, how much revenue they have, the growth is amazing. Nick, put a chart in here and post because it's like a 10x, I think, each year or something crazy like that when I talked about it on the other pod. But they're very unprofitable, almost $1 billion in loss in 2024. And that's interest payments on a lot of their debt. They have almost 8 billion in debt. Huge debt load to buy all these GPUs. And that has been the question we've been talking about here, Chamath, are these GPUs, are these neo clouds, fancy way of saying?
I'll give you a couple of factoids about CoreWeave, which I find super impressive. So the first question is like you would say, why didn't AWS, GCP, and Azure eat these guys for breakfast, lunch, and dinner? And as it turns out, they had one very specific technical decision that I think was extremely valuable, which is that these guys did not use hypervisors.
Explain what that is.
So a hypervisor is basically a middleware layer of software that allows you to abstract units of compute so that then you can make them available. And instead, they basically allowed you to write to the bare metal, and this very native approach that allowed them to get a lot of traction. So it's a really interesting thing to note that just that simple thing, like one simple technical design decision, can allow you to build what looks like, at least from the revenue perspective, an incredible business, right? So kudos to them. Super awesome to see that you can still maneuver around the big giants. I think that that's cool. I think the big question with CoreWeave is, what is the period of amortization and the useful life of these GPUs from NVIDIA? And I think that that question is up in the air. As you said, Jason, a lot of their losses are these interest payments. And as long as that they have that calculated right in their models that they used to borrow all this money to buy all these GPUs from NVIDIA, this is going to be a killer business. To the extent that they got that calculation wrong, meaning we thought the useful life was 10 years, but it turned out to be 5, this business is deeply underwater. So I think that that's the bet. The bet is they've built an amount of headway. They're going to continue to do this good technical engineering. But the other side of it is the useful life right? Is the technology curve right? Is Moore's law and all these other things, will they work in its favor or against it? And I think that's
and Joe, people say useful lifespan, GPUs, 3 to 5 years before the next generation is so much more powerful, especially in relation to power consumption, that it's worth running it. Now with servers, old CPUs for running Facebook, it's a totally different story. You can keep those running 5 to 7 years before it's not worth running them. You have to turn them off. What do you think here?
You're right. There's an economic question on the power and all these things. I actually know Brandon. He lives nearby me in my house in Montana. He's a really smart guy. And I think the really interesting thing, when they built this that I think is relevant going forward is these guys were commodities traders, and they were originally buying stuff to like mine Bitcoin and other stuff like that. And they realized as commodities traders, there's like a certain supply and demand in the market of GPU chips, but also of all the data centers, by the way. And it's really interesting what they did is they locked down the full supply of tons of data centers, tons of the power they needed, tons of the chips. And they're very, very thoughtful. I mean, they're traders and they're very economic. And I think they have modeled this stuff well.
That explains the technical decision because they have to have very low latency throughput in order to transact efficiently as commodities traders, I'm guessing.
There is one Achilles heel here for this company, Friedberg. They had massive revenue growth, but they have a dependency. 60% of the revenue now from Microsoft, and Microsoft seems to have done this either, it's unclear, but maybe to service the OpenAI deal where they needed to give them a bunch of infrastructure, or it might be for Azure. It's unclear. People have been asking this question for a couple of years now. But what do you think of a business with one client with 60% dependency?
And this is how these things work, Jason, is one client tends to grow really, really fast. And they're actually, so they do this orchestration framework called Sunk. I know a little bit about it. It's like really easy for scheduling workflows and batches and all these things. But I think a lot of other people are using really well. They've just bought weights and biases, right? Which like everyone uses basically. It's a great buy.
And
right?
they're killer.
That's awesome.
They're killer for training. I mean, I think these guys crush in training.
Satya Nadella said that Microsoft was doing this maybe not for a long-term usage. So Friedberg, your thoughts on CoreWeave?
I'm not as deep as you guys are. I remember in 2003, I worked for 9 months at a private equity firm, and I would cold call like companies that hadn't raised venture capital that were profitable and fast growing and see if they would take our money. That's the business model. And I spent a lot of time in the sector of businesses that were called speed doublers. I don't know if you guys remember these companies. 2003 was before we all had broadband internet. So a lot of people were using dial-up, and you could pay $9.99 a month for a speed doubler. And what it would do is it would basically on your browser set the server to be their server, and they had a cache of many of the popular sites on the internet. So when you started browsing the internet on your computer, everything loaded faster because they had really fast servers and you got these caches. And these companies, dude, they were doing like tens of millions of revenue, high margin, 50% plus EBITDA margin, and growing like 100% plus a year. And I remember we spent a bunch of time looking at these companies. This is right before I joined Google. And I was like, this feels like a transitory business. It's like an arbitrage between where we were and where we're going. And that's what ended up happening. Many of them just cash flowed out. The founders took money, or they were able to get a really smart private equity recap done, get some money out and run at some low multiple of EBITDA or something. And so I worry a little bit about a business like this where there's 4 or 5 companies that are each doing $80 billion of CapEx this year to create infrastructure that effectively starts to replace what these guys are effectively offering out as a service. That would be my biggest if I was to do diligence on this business, that's where I would spend a lot of my time is like, guys, what's the capacity going to be in a year or two? Sort of like when broadband hit the internet, you didn't need speed doublers anymore. Do you really need to be paying as much as you are today? Is there going to be as much demand? How much is this going to get bundled in with GCP or AWS and so on in the future? So that would be my kind of macro hesitation and caution on the diligence as I ran my diligence on this thing.
Yeah, you basically need an economist to map this all out. It's the same question for data centers in a related way, right? Which you just need to map everything. And I don't have those numbers. So you're right. It's a hard thing to figure out.
That's right.
Well, the founders have control of the company.
And they sold $500 million in secondary a few months ago.
They sold a lot. Maybe it's 150 each or something
but they've kept most of their position. They're smart guys. So let's see.
They still own the majority.
I don't know them, so I don't want to speak negatively about the business, and I haven't spent much time on it. But I mean, I think that there's
what's
an
the worst that
important
could
kind of
happen if you
arbitrage.
speak negatively about somebody's business? You know,
Jake, you
what's
tell
the
us.
worst
Like you've been maybe
you get more
professionally for 20
followers. I
years.
don't know.
Yeah.
You tell us, Jake.
No idea. No idea.
What is it like to be on somebody's list for a decade?
I don't know. I mean, the ratings keep going up for This Week in Startups and All In, so I'll take it. Shout out.
Are you purposefully starting to dress up, Jake Al, by the way? Because I notice every week now you're wearing like a button down
gig.
and a jacket.
I had a speaking gig, but my friends at Eton reached out to me, so I might be trying to do a little grift.
Are you doing a plug right now? Are you plugging right now?
No, Laura Piana hasn't reached out, but Eton shirts, which I'm wearing right now, ETON, you know, the famous shirt people are they've been reaching out. And I also no. But I'm also saying Tom Ford's people reached out and said, you know, that lapel thing, you can take that off if you want. We'll have somebody come over. So I just wanted to shout out my friends over there. I have no commercial deal with them yet.
The Keton, Kiton jackets I've been wearing. Kiton.
Keton, very nice. I would like to shout them out.
Jackets on earth. I wear them all the time.
Absolutely.
I love those jackets. Just saying, let's move on.
By the way,
and Joe Lonsdale's outfits are done by the Uyghurs. The Uyghurs in China. He gets them specifically made for $17 each.
I was recently sponsored by a company. This service is incredible. What they do is when you're flying into an FBO,
put an ad in it, right?
They meet you at the FBO and they take your watch and they set the new time for you. So especially if it's a mechanical watch, it's a very complicated movement.
This is very important, right? You know what? I was flying to Malta.
You gotta be kidding me that this exists.
And I had my watch collection, and they did this for me when I was flying between Montenegro and Malta. Absolutely.
I'm just trolling.
This is like Forbes 5 Villains telling you how to look at the world. We should get rid of income tax. I'm sure everybody listening is like, really convenient. No income tax for the billionaires and sent to millionaires. Good job, guys. God. All right, let's keep going down the All right, Chamath, you know, we've been going back and forth in the group chat, and you've been talking about it publicly, maybe Main Street versus Wall Street, and what's going on in the markets here, because there's EU bond issues. We obviously, it seems like in some ways, maybe the Trump campaign is not thinking about the stock market as much as they're thinking about the bond market. Explain to us your take on markets right now.
Yeah, I think that there's 3 markets that are important. There's the U.S. long end of the curve. So this is the 10-year bond yield. I think then there's the U.S. equity market. And then the next important market are the European bond and equity markets together. And I'll explain why in a second. But just on the first few, I mentioned this before, but I really do think we're in a secular shift where I think the MAGA majority and the base of people that can be a reliable voting bloc in the future, as I've said before, are working and middle-class folks that don't necessarily own a ton of stocks, nor do they own homes, of which there's a lot. Second cohort are people that are pro-innovation and pro-tech. And the third are patriotic business owners. I think that cohort is very large. And I think that when the core strategists inside of MAGA figure this out, one of the big takeaways is that they're not going to care about the stock market and Wall Street. And a lot of the policies will be viewed through the lens of Main Street. And I think that you started to see this rhetoric now, one from Besant, and we'll play this clip in a second. And the second was just today from Trump himself. But Nick, do you want to play the Besant clip if you have it?
I think over the medium term, which is what we're focused on, it's a focus on Main Street. Wall Street's done great. Wall Street can continue to do fine. But we have a focus on small business and the consumers. So we are going to rebalance the economy. We're going to bring manufacturing jobs home.
That was the first one. The second one was just today, Nick, I sent it to you. Do you want to just show it to these guys, which I think is really interesting?
So it says here, breaking news from, I guess, Unusual Wells. Trump has just said he's not looking at the stock market.
Okay, so...
Not sure I believe that, but okay.
So why is this actually valuable? Well, if we are incentivized, if the government of America is incentivized to implement policies that crack the equity markets, it's actually really good in some ways. Number one is, if you deflate asset prices, you also deflate inflation. Okay? And
give an example there for the audience so we make it clear.
NVIDIA is ripping at all-time highs. You are like, oh, wow, I'm so cash rich. You can go get a margin loan. You take that money, you reinvest it in a second home and a third home. You sell some stock, you start to buy cars, all this other stuff. It drives consumptive behavior that on the margin isn't there if the markets were much, much lower than this. So if you rebase the equity values that people have, what you do is you actually depress the amount of free cash flow that they have to spend on other things. So it's a deflationary tactic. How the bond market reacts to that is if the stock market goes down is you start to become a flight to quality, right? Oh my gosh, there's volatility in the stock market. Oh my gosh, I don't want to deal with the stock market going down. Let me just sell, take some chips off the table and buy 10-year bonds. When you buy the bonds, the interest rate goes down. Why is that good for America? We have $10 trillion we need to go out and borrow in the next 9 months. And so if we can pay 3%, 3.8%, 4%, we save ourselves trillions of dollars versus if we had to pay 4.5%, 5.5%. So that's the second thing. And then the third thing is that right now, what we had this week because of the Ukraine and Zelensky thing is basically Trump say, we are totally risk off this war. And I'm not going to debate whether that's right or wrong, but that's what he said. We're going to curtail the aid. We're not even going to share intelligence. They're on their own. What did that force? What happened this week was the Europeans had to basically circle the wagons and they said, okay, we're going to step up. And what they announced was a 4-year plan to borrow money to invest in defense. What they also did, which was really interesting, is the UK specifically said, we're going to borrow it in this clever little way. This is their interpretation, so that it doesn't actually count in the debt to GDP calculations of my country. So they're starting
Convenient.
to play. So then how did the bond market react to it? Nick, you can show it. They're like, you know what, guys, if you want to fight this war, obviously you're allowed to do whatever you want, but the cost that you're going to have to pay is going to go up. This has been going up every day. And you're at a point now where this is severe fiscal pressure on these governments. I do not know how they sustain their deficits and raise more debt. So all of this is happening all at the same time. I think Trump is pro-Main Street. Equity markets basically do not get bid. The bond markets respond positively. Yields go down. Good for America. They extract themselves from spending programs like, again, it's more than a spending program, but I'll just say it in this context narrowly. Russia-Ukraine is a spending program that if you take off the table, that balance of responsibility goes to Europe. And then the markets are saying, this is not right. We want this war to end, and we're going to make it more expensive for you to litigate it. If you put it all together, it's a really interesting moment in the markets I haven't seen in a very long time.
Joe, you think this is the refinancing of our debt is the end game here? There's like maybe 10% of people who seem to have fallen in that camp when I queried on these 4 group chats. Hey, if we can depress everything, we lower consumption, we break inflation even more. Maybe people lose their jobs, less consumption, and rates go down. We have to cut rates 3 or 4 times, put pressure on the Fed. Then we can maybe refinance our debt, which is coming up some percentage of it. What do you think of that theory?
Jason, Chamath has a lot of interesting thoughts here, and I think it's a very smart analysis. I'm not fully aligned. It is true. Bond markets hate war. War is expensive. War is inflationary. It's very clear Europe is going through, war is more likely for us to spend money, and that hurts them. In the U.S., I think the number one thing that Scott Bessent and Trump would want around this is to fight for Main Street, like they said. That really is, the kind of populist energy we have right now. And so I think they are focused on lower interest rates. Lower interest rates, I have someone who works with me, their spouse, is a real estate agent, and that they're having a really tough couple of years because interest rates spiked up. If you get interest rates down again, there's so many different places in America where people start making money again with the title companies, with brokers, there's so many things that happen, right, with that. And
trickle down. Yeah.
It's not just trickle down. It's like, this is the part of the economy that just really does start to turn on, and certain transactions can happen again. And you're right, it is cheaper debt. That is an advantage as well. So I think disinflation is very important, and I think we have to find some way to get there. Chamath may be right that it's worth hitting assets to get to disinflation. That's something that Scott could be working on because of all the debt. But it is true.
It's the easiest. It's the easiest.
It's the easiest, and we do need it for sure. So, and I think there's some other more clever ways to get there, but I do like that direction.
I mean, you said there's some more clever ways to get there. Obviously, we don't want to see 8, 9, 10% unemployment. That's another way to get there, and we don't want that because Main Street equals jobs. So, what is your other ways to get there?
Well, the other ways to get there is there's really 2 right now in our society that are very positive. One of them is higher productivity through AI. I'm working on a ton of things, as are everyone else doing that. Like, we're doing construction for much cheaper right now.
Government can't do that, though, right? Government can't be involved in that. That's up to us.
Yeah, we can make sure not to screw. I mean, David's doing good work. We can make sure not to screw it up. There's a lot of people trying to screw it up in government. So I think David's job is very important there to get us there.
Sam Altman's not here, please.
And then the second thing is actually cutting spend, like just giving out hundreds of billions willy-nilly to Stacey Abrams at all is very inflationary. And so I think cutting spend actually is a very positive thing. We could do a lot more of that.
Friedberg, you heard the 2 gentlemen. What are your thoughts on the refinancing of interest? As I've done before, I'm going to give you incredible leadership credit for 3 years ago on this pod, pushing all of us to really think about what would happen if the debt increased another $8 trillion, which it did. And I think that influenced a lot of people in our circles. And obviously that's something that the president took on when none of us thought any president would ever take on that issue. How much pain do you think Trump is willing to take with the stock market going down in order to refinance the debt? Is he willing to be incredibly unpopular? Is he willing to deal with the criticism from Wall Street and from equity holders over some sustained period? And how much would he be? If it goes down, the market goes down 10, 20%, do you think he's going to cry uncle, or do you think he's willing to take that kind of pain, Freeberg?
Like I said, I don't know about Trump. There's I would say 60-40, I'd be right. 40% I'd be wrong. So I don't know.
Most people are here for that. That's actually a pretty good ratio in poker if you can win that many hands.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say 60%. He's probably different than Trump 1.0, and he's probably less influenced by the short-term rumblings about the market.
Okay.
And he's probably listening to Bessent on this one, although, I think it's got to be a complicated relationship between the 2 of them at the moment. I do think that he is aware, and I would imagine the administration generally, with Bessent and others in kind of key leadership positions, are trying to make the case that if we can get rates down, we have an opportunity to kind of refinance this $10 trillion that's coming due in the next 12 months and get ourselves into a kind of more sustainable financing position. There's still the fiscal position, which is how are we spending money, and how are we spending money over time, that needs to be addressed.
This is the central question. You're totally right.
Let's address that specifically with Ukraine. Your a bit of a hawk, an American exceptionalist, Joe. And we are looking at a situation where we spent $175 billion. There were some other numbers that Trump was floating around that were incorrect, and they got fact-checked. $175 billion is what we're actually in for, according to all accounts. This was done, as I said many times on this very program and got laughed at and joked about, done on a lease loan. Trump, because these things were done on a lease loan, now has the upper hand with Zelensky, and he's a great negotiator, and he said, we want $500 billion back. Don't need to make this about dollars and cents here, because obviously this is life and death and people's democracy. We're talking about their sovereignty. But that $175 billion, if he gets that $500 billion back, that's a 42% IRR in 3 years on this. Even if we just got our money back, that would be fine for the American people. How do you look at the war in Ukraine, both financially and in terms of containing Putin, and finally in terms of our participation in NATO? Is it time for us to leave NATO? Joe Lonsdale.
Wow. Well, Jason, Putin's a bad guy. That's number one. He shouldn't have invaded.
Thank you for saying that. It's refreshing to hear it on this podcast.
I do think the last administration mismanaged it. I don't think he would have invaded with Trump as president. He certainly would have invaded with a competent person threatening him. So, but now we have to have peace, and I do want peace. I don't want to have the war continuing. But to get peace, you got to get both sides to come to the table. I prefer peace through strength. I prefer being really strong on Putin and showing why he has to have peace. But then you need Zelensky to be a partner for it too. And I do think Zelensky had the wrong idea on the White House last week. He should have been thanking them. He should have come more humbly. He should have actually been directed towards really wanting peace. And listen, I agree that Ukraine's a very corrupt country. We may find out that he and his cronies have been taking a bunch of money. I don't know if they are or not. Either way, he has not really been signaling the right way to be open to peace, and a peace that does, I think, have to give up a little bit of Ukraine in order to get there. I think that's the option on the table right now, and that's the direction I want.
What about the NATO question? What's the, and thank you for being so candid here. What's the NATO outcome here? Is it time for maybe Europe to just go it alone? Because they don't seem to like what happened last Friday at the White House. And maybe, do you think it's time? Maybe we bow out and let them arm up?
This is really tough for me because some of the people I care about most in the world live in places like Germany and around there, and I want them to be safe. I also think that the historic relationship between the UK and the US is this very, very valuable thing that we have. It shouldn't just be tossed aside. These are critical, very long time allies and cousins. I think Europe's in a very, very bad place. It's very dysfunctional, man. It's I do not see European civilization going the right way the next 20 or 30 years. I think JD's right to criticize them on anti-free speech, on arresting people who criticize the Islamic threat, more than the people actually doing the rapes and stuff. It's crazy. These places have lost their minds,
Yeah.
It's bonkers.
Yeah.
So do I want to totally give it up? No. But do I want to demand fiercely that the certain things get fixed and to use our foreign policy apparatus to make sure we fix those things if we're going to stay in the relationship? 100%.
What do you think, Chamath? This NATO question seems like Europe is kind of signaling that they're willing to go it alone. And should the United States just say, okay, go for it, we're out? Because that's literally what Sachs retweeted recently, just said, hey, we're out. It's your problem. And I think the administration's given him free rein to discuss the topic. He discussed it here for many years. What are your thoughts? Should we be out on NATO?
Well, I think the question is, when do these transnational organizations outlive their utility? That's the question on the table. And it's not just a question for NATO, but it's a question for a bunch of these other things. The WHO, NATO, the United Nations. There's many of these organizations. What you've seen is that there are competitive organizations now that are just as important, if not more. So if you didn't like OPEC, well, then there was this OPEC++ thing. If you didn't like how the Europeans and the Americans did intelligence gathering, then all of a sudden Five Eyes came out of nowhere. If you didn't like the G7, there's the BRICS, right? So there's this tendency for the world to create these startups to try to challenge incumbency as the conditions on the ground change. I think the most important thing right now the Europeans need to do is acknowledge this one critical fact. The individual governments of Europe are vibrant and powerful. The European Union itself was created almost without any real teeth. And so what happened is the folks there started to pass inordinate numbers of laws
Yeah.
And that has made it really complicated to be a European company, a European citizen. And that has to get sorted out. What is the real decision there? Is it about being Italian or is it about being European? What is the separation? And I don't think that that's clear. And I think once they figure that out, all this other stuff is much easier to figure out.
Well, you also have, other organizations, Interpol, right? We have that. You have the UN. I mean, it is maybe time to just re-underwrite each of them. Freeberg, what do you think?
I think that there's a viable case for a peaceful transition to kind of a multipolar power dynamic. And if you're a techno-pessimist, you're going to have a point of view that there are more limited resources available to humans on Earth, and therefore we have to have influence to access those resources. If you're a techno-optimist, you will believe that through AI and automation and all these other technologies that we could spend quite a bit of time around, that we are going to have abundant housing, abundant fuel, abundant materials, and generally an abundance of everything that one particular group might demand or need. And you don't need to go be an empire to access the resources that your people are demanding. And what I mean is the mining industry is a good example. There was this discovery, which I think we put on the docket for the Science Corner today, of a giant thorium reserve in Inner Mongolia, which can be used to make a thorium molten salt reactor. And there's enough thorium in this reserve in China to produce enough energy for 60,000 years of consumption based on current consumption rates. I saw a fantastic presentation this week by a startup that's using AI and other sensing technologies to identify new rare earth deposits in the crust of the earth that we have absolutely no visibility into today. And many of our assumptions about how much availability there is of certain rare earth metals is wrong, and that there actually may be many, many, many orders of magnitude more material available to us to mine. And the technology for mining is getting better. The technology for discovering these deposits is improving, and so on. So in that world where suddenly I can make all the food I want, everyone can be fed. There's plenty of land. There's plenty of housing. There's plenty of water. There's automation and robots that are serving me and all this sort of amazing stuff that's coming this century. Do I really need to be having a friggin' conflict with Russia and China over access to some jungle or some plot of land on the other side of the planet? Or can I live sustainably in my country and everyone's going to be generally happy? So I think that this idea that maybe the US exits NATO and the US dials down its level of conflict and opposition to Russia and or China is a pretty reasonable, and I would argue maybe even a techno-optimistic point of view. And, we may find that in the next couple of years, we start to really believe it. And if we start to believe it, all the things that we're fighting over today, you don't really need to fight over anymore, except for the expansionist intentions of individuals, which is a sociological phenomenon, which may still continue. But I'm not sure that you need to be investing as much resources as we have historically. So I would argue maybe NATO in a multipolar world of abundance isn't as necessary as it has been in the past century, which was a world that was limited in resources, fighting for access, and a growing global population, particularly in the developed world in the West, that's made it a necessity to maintain U.S. primacy and U.S. policing of the world. And I know others might have a point of view that's a little bit different on that, but I just think we could maybe...
I think actually what you're talking about is a Star Trek beautiful version of abundance in the world. If these rare earth minerals create unlimited energy and you're energy independent, you look at the world differently. And Joe, we certainly in America look at the world differently, as we're all Gen Xers here, basically. We look at the world much differently now since we have energy independence than we did under Bush and these farm wars, in the Middle East. Yeah.
I mean, listen, yeah, and I'm one of the most optimistic people. I call myself the American optimist, Jason, as you know.
You have a great podcast, American Optimist, that none of us have been on yet. Yeah, appreciate it.
Kind of get you on. We live together now.
I mean, he had Sachs on. Have you had Sachs on at least, American Optimist?
People are too busy to come on. I'll try to get you.
All right, so you're 0 for 4 with Besties. Got it. Okay.
All right, I got to work on it. Listen, I would love AI to get to the point, I think it will, where it starts to accelerate growth, where this energy stuff can be mined more easily. But until we're at least 5-6% growth, because we are going to the post-scarcity world, we don't know when it's coming. I do still think global trade really matters. I do think global security for ourselves, like we don't want random people with nuclear proliferation. So there are issues that are going to affect all of us. But I think Dave makes a really great point that it is becoming less important over time. It's true.
Let's talk about this Chat GPT. I guess they came out with 4.5. It was such a dud. I didn't even realize that they launched it. Chamath, you monitor this, or Freeberg, did you try it? Because I've been using Grok as my default now, then Gemini, then Chat GPT. That's my order right now, because I wanted to see how good Grok is. And man, Grok is really caught up. And I don't have an interest here in, I don't have equity in any of these companies. Well, I own Google in the public markets, but I don't own the other two. But pretty amazing, yeah? What do you think of this 4.5 dud and what it means, Chamath?
Well, I use them in the company building context, and specifically at 8090 because of what we're building. And what I would tell you is that I think Anthropic just continues to do an incredible job. I think Claude 3.7 it just kicks ass.
Oh, you're on Claude you're using on the back end, yeah.
We use it for a lot of automated code generation.
Got it.
And its models on code generation, I think, are just exceptional. They are the best in market. Then what I would say is, as a consumer, I've mostly flipped my usage to Grok 3.
Yeah.
And the reason is that it's in line with where I consume most of my information. It's elegantly integrated inside of X.
And to point this out, to explain it to people, when you're in Twitter, now X, on the top right hand of a tweet, there's an XAI button. When you click it, it just gives you the full context of the tweet. So I was reading one of Dara's from Uber's tweets about autonomy. Yeah. I guess they added 2 more partners. When I clicked it, it gave me more than I ever could want. It was almost like a deep research of the context of a very short retweet he did. Yeah. And I didn't have to cut and paste and form a question. So owning a social network equals instant. And here we're going to show it with Joe Lonsdale's, where he says, hey, listen, the crypto tax feels like taxation to me. And look, it goes and finds 4 web pages. You can see there, it tells you which ones, Wikipedia and CNBC amongst them. And then it gives Joe's position. This is like very elegant. This is super elegant.
And I think there's a small tweak to this.
Okay.
That Elon and I were talking about actually on X, which is then just the nature of being able to analyze a post for its veracity becomes really valuable. That extra little thing, when it's available, I think will have a really big impact on how people use it in this context. So I use Grok for the consumer applications. For all of our code generation, we're using Sonnet 3.7. It's exceptional.
Which is Anthropic's, which is doing a major round of funding. Got it. Okay.
Yeah. And I think like the thing with the GPT 4.5 is that it's kind of like good. Now, here's a tangent. Let me just do a small little rant, which is we're at the bleeding edge of where these benchmarks are useful. Meaning, part of why, Jason, maybe you weren't necessarily watching this as closely, and I think where the media and the sense-making organizations get confused is they don't know now what to say. Because they'll say, hey, look at how I did on SweBench. Look at how I did on IMO. Look at how I did on Amy. And the problem, the dirty little secret of these model makers is that these guys are so trained on the evals that they're overfitting.
Yeah.
And all this overfitting basically makes it pretty unreliable. And
what this means, to translate into plain English for humans listening, is they basically are optimizing for the test out of the benchmark, which is kind of like a person in high school or optimizing for the SATs. It doesn't mean they're going to be a great student, but it may mean that they just spent a lot of time taking SAT tests.
Yeah, so we have one problem, which is that I think it would be very valuable for the industry that it be solved, which is that we need to have extremely difficult and always changing third-party independent verifiable benchmarks.
That's a great idea. Like the safety test for cars that's not run by the companies. Got it.
Yeah. Less about safety, though, more about capability.
Sure.
And I think if we're reporting on that, then these leaps will mean something more than what they are today, right? So
got it.
When Alibaba pushes Gwen this week, it was an exceptional model. It's probably one of the better open source, if not the best open source model out there. DeepSeek's, I think, is also quite good. It doesn't get any press anymore. So I think we're starting to get to this place where there's such abundance that actually people are just kind of like overwhelmed with all the choice and they don't know how to differentiate.
This is like 100 Michelin star restaurants opening up in your city. You just don't have enough meals to eat. We're basically drowning in abundance, to Freeberg's point. I don't think we understand exactly how golden this golden age is in terms of technology.
Distribution becomes really important. I think that's
absolutely
why
we discussed
Grok
this,
inside
right?
of X is very valuable. But also, I think Google just said that they're going to drop an AI button right into the front door core search page. I don't know if you guys saw that, but
no, Google's doing it. When you're logged in, you will get the snippet at the top. Inside of YouTube, they're doing summaries of the chat and the comments. And then you think about what Meta could do. You know, they already put the AI box up there, but you know, they'll knock some of that off.
No,
and
I meant obviously on the Google front door, like google.com.
Yeah. Does anyone use that anymore?
Extraordinary. Well, I mean, Google searches are still going, but
and Facebook is about to launch a competitor to ChatGPT and Grok. Yeah. Well,
they're going to do a straight up
standalone app. And the thing that they are so good at is whenever they launch an app, it doesn't matter when they launch it. They'll just get it to 1 billion people.
I mean, that is super extraordinary. All this, I think, leads to so much abundance. What I'm seeing in startups, I was the first investor in a company called Superhuman, very elegant software, luxury software for email productivity. Give it a shot. What he did was, I didn't mean that's a super plug here, but anyway, I'm so in love with the company and the founder. I just had them on This Week in Startups. He's like one of the best product minds I've ever met. Extraordinary. Going. And Superhuman now, because it's gotten so cheap to do AI, that they are composing in this beta I'm in, all of the replies to your email in real time on the back end, and you can see potential drafts. They summarize everything, even if you never read the summary. That would be cost prohibitive 6 to 12 months ago. But now it's a no-brainer, and because they're paid software, it's like, so this is going to get very interesting very quick. Joe, your thoughts on this abundance?
Yeah, I'm actually building something on email, like you said, that works with your team to automatically kind of like, create reports on everything that comes in and route it for you. Because a lot of our friends, when you're a CEO, you basically become a traffic cop. It's actually the email's going to do it for you. It's going to be really nice. But listen, I'm invested in Grok 3 and I'm biased towards Elon. But a lot of our companies will build on top of multiple of them as well. And I think you're talking about code gen. I'm in Cognition. I think a lot of my companies using Dev, and it's actually just like crushing it. This stuff's getting like 10-15% better every month. It's really amazing, and it's good for companies like that. I'm mostly at that level where I'm like using all of them or using a bunch of them. So I love the fact there's all this competition because it just makes it cheaper and better for me for all my companies I'm building.
And it's not slowing down is the other piece of this.
No, it's getting better. It's scary actually. I thought it would asymptote, and it hasn't. So
no,
it's amazing.
that's the part that's so fascinating to me. And then there's a really interesting ripple that I don't know if you guys are aware of yet, but journalists who have been losing their jobs at a tremendous pace are now being hired by data aggregators to come in, look at queries. Let's say you had an expertise in agriculture, Friedberg, they'll pay you. And I actually saw one of these job descriptions, $40 an hour to sit there and answer questions about agriculture, look at answers and refine them and do reinforcement learning. We're going to have a new job class, which is people who train AIs and people who fact check AIs and refine AIs. And this could be a $50,000 to $150,000 a year job, because every time you make the AI a little better, everybody on the planet gets to benefit from it. This is an extraordinary new job career. I don't know what it's going to be called. Reinforcement learner. I don't know. Friedberg, you get the last take here. Great job on the abundance angle, which just pushed a really great discussion here. Wrap us up with your thoughts on these LLMs and the pace of AI.
I disagree with Chamath. I think it's like you got a lot of great stuff here. It's changing every week. I'm not paying attention to the details anymore. New models come out every week. This is like when the internet launched, new websites, like this is carrying us forward. It's impossible to dissect and predict what's going to win, when, and why right now.
What are you obsessed with in the AI front? Are there things
I use ChatGPT research a lot.
The deep research, right? Where it fires off a bunch of web pages. Okay. And you're paying, that means the $200 a month, or you have
I pay $200 a month, yeah.
Yeah,
no,
okay.
I find it very good. Yeah. And then we build everything at Ohalo on GCP, and we run a bunch of different models.
That's Google's cloud for people who don't know the acronym.
Yep.
Got it.
And then we run models.
They're incredible, yeah.
Yeah, lots of different tools, but it's awesome.
Hey, as
I
we
don't know.
wrap here, we're following our muse here at All In. Whatever the besties are most interested in, we are going to bring you, the audience, along with us. So Freeberg and I have been obsessed with content creation and media. So we're doing a little media summit at South by Southwest. Apologies that it's sold out. And then Chamath, he likes this F1. He's a big F1 fan. I've never been. I'm really excited that we're going to be throwing the best party
You're not invited.
at F1 Saturday, May 4th. I am coming. I'm securing the bag.
There's only room for
As
two.
long as I get the bag, I'll be
besties.
outside. You know what? I'll just go to 11. Give me my bag, and I'll go play a tournament. I'll go to 11 and have a steak, and it's a club. I'll pop some bottles at 11 while you guys are at F1. You can Photoshop me in. But the fans can come and our community can come, allin.com/events for all the details. And if you
Big
want to
party
purchase,
on Saturday night. Big party.
it's
on
going to be
Saturday night.
fun.
We're throwing a big party in Miami around F1, and we're going to do a little stage show beforehand because it's going to be
nice.
awesome. And we're
Hey,
going
what about,
to celebrate my birthday because I'm not going to be able to make it in June.
Can I wear my Apple Watch? Can somebody loan me a nice watch for F1? I can't show up with an Apple Watch. Anybody got a?
You're not allowed to wear an Apple Watch to F1.
Okay, I'm going to put my Apple Watch in my drawer.
I've never been to a
Tell me
Formula
which
One.
watch to get. I
have
want a
you
watch
guys-
that costs 25 to
first-
75K. What's a good starter watch for Jake Al?
That's like an appetizer. That's what my watch has as a watch.
God, your watch is watch.
my
Joe,
watch
you
as
got
well.
you into this watch thing. What should I buy for
So it's
100
like-
dimes? What do you got there?
You can get a decent Patek for 100 now. It's like they've gone down. Yeah, it's
Yeah, I mean everything's collapsing. Like, shouldn't I be
Yeah.
able to snipe
it's,
something here?
it's deflation thanks to Trump and AI, right? You can grab
Yeah,
grab one of
absolutely.
these.
AI general. Okay, whatever. Somebody give me a suggestion for
Get
a
a
watch.
good
Let me
mechanical.
grift it.
Get a good mechanical watch, not an automatic, a mechanical.
Anybody wants to sponsor me for watches and get a mention here on the show, I will
Yeah.
grift the hell out of that. Jason at calicanis.com for life.
I just got a text from Swatch and Tudor.
Oh, Swatch watch. I used to wear, actually, in the 80s. I don't know if Freeberg definitely had a ton of those Casio watches, right? Did you have the Casio where you would do your...
The
Tell us about
G-Shock.
your
The
Casio
G-Shock
watch.
is a great watch. That's a
No, I'm
What's that
talking
one?
about him with the calculator watch.
I had that. It was. I remember it was $50. It was a really big deal to.
It
be
was
able to afford
$50 and it
get
was worth it.
You play the game where you start and stop it as fast as you could. That was
Totally.
fun.
Exactly. You
Yeah.
remember that?
Yeah.
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
had one on each
Exactly.
wrist. Oh, I was doubling down.
I recently bought a G-Shock on Amazon as kind of like a memento to
Hold up.
recount. And my
Yeah.
friggin' daughter stole the G-Shock.
Nostalgia.
It's apparently
Nostalgia.
Yeah, it's a cool.
Freeberg, we can all bet on this. What calculator do you have on your desk right now? How many calculators are on your desk now? How many can you reach? How many Casios are within reach?
There's only
A
one
Freeberg.
calculator that matters.
Only one for me.
Yeah. Okay.
HP 17B. There's only one
All right.
calculator.
I got my
TI-82. What are you talking about?
I got my
TI-82.
T89 still. 89 for me. But
Oh,
yeah.
now you just told me how you're younger than me, Joe. Now I know
I
you're like
am.
4 years younger
I
than
am.
me. Yeah.
That's true.
Point of privilege, actually.
TI-80. It was the 81-82 transition that was like a big deal.
Yeah. You know what I was doing when you guys were on your calculator?
I can't even imagine.
I was in McKinley Park in Bay Ridge getting to second base. All right, enough. Allin.com/events.
Did the guy consent?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So he's a really hot dude. Please, we have two genders, folks. There's an executive order. I read it. All right. All right. My Trump grade for the week is C for chaos, A for effort with DOGE. Let's try to get back to a B, President Trump. We'll see you all next time on the All In Pod.
Love you, boys. Thanks, Joe.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys. That's fun.
Bye-bye.
All right, everybody. We're suited up. We're suited up because the czar, the wolf of the White House, is here. My brother, David Sachs. We were trying to get you on the program. You were going to make a drop in to talk about all this great crypto news coming out of the White House. And let's face it, this was a, some people saying chaotic, some people say intense. This is a pretty amazing, intense week for the administration. So we'll get into a little bit of that. But you're here specifically to talk about the crypto reserve. So welcome back to your program, the All In Podcast, David Sachs.
Good to be back. I see
Good to
that
have
you've
you.
suited up here.
Yeah, I mean, I figured I was for people who weren't here for the pre-show. I get on. Sachs is wearing a white shirt and a tie. I'm wearing a blazer and a white shirt. So I'm like, I got to go put a tie on. He's like, Jake, I'll wear a blazer. I got to go get a blazer. So then we came back and here we
Nice.
are. And
all right. Well, look, I just have to correct one thing. I think it's been a very smooth week at the White House. The president has lived up to one of his campaign promises. This is not something new. Remember,
Okay.
you go all the way back to his national speech during the campaign, and he reiterated this many times that he wanted to create a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Sometimes he called it a digital asset stockpile, What we've ultimately done here is both. He also, in his week one EO on crypto, you guys remember I came on the show to talk about that. He asked our president's working group on digital assets to evaluate the idea of a reserve or stockpile. And we made a recommendation, and this administration is moving at tech speed. It's really great to work for an administration where you can actually get things done and things move quickly. We made our recommendation, and then we worked with the lawyers to implement it, and the president signed it last night. But this is fully consistent with everything he's always said.
Agree on that. I guess the one criticism that you're going to get when you go face the media, so I might as well put it here, is the order in which you're doing things. Sometimes Mr. Trump is very expressive on the social medias, which is better than, let's say, the previous administration, which just wasn't available and in cognitive decline. So I guess the question of he announces something and then you guys explain it deeper. Is that the optimal way to do this? Should we not worry about it? Should you come out with like more official stuff? I guess that's the move fast, break things that we are used to in Silicon Valley, but that people, whether it's in business, are maybe a little concerned about, that things are maybe different now in the White House and in how we're running our government. Maybe you could expand on that.
Have you ever considered that maybe you just had an overreaction to a tweet?
Well, okay. So if we're going to place the blame on me,
I'm just saying that
I wasn't the only one. The original crypto OGs were like, wait a second, why is he picking these three and not these three? So that made a lot of people, putting myself out of it, like, whoa, what's going on here? Is he picking favorites? And that's, I guess, everybody's big concern. So maybe you could assuage that.
We're not. Yeah, we're not picking favorites, obviously, except I will say this. We do think Bitcoin is special, and I can get into the reasons
explain why. That's a great thing, yeah.
Well, Bitcoin's the original cryptocurrency. It's the first one. It's the only one that doesn't have an issuer, right? It's very decentralized. It's, in crypto, they call this the Immaculate Conception. We don't really know how it got here. We don't know who Satoshi is. It's almost mystical, you would say.
Yes.
It's the most valuable one. It has a $2 trillion market cap, and it's the most secure. It's never been hacked, right? So we're now, over 15 years into this journey, and there's been a lot of people who've been skeptical along the way, and there's been a lot of ups and downs, but here it is. I remember back in 2011, I think it's the first time I bought a Bitcoin. I think it was at $120. Now it's at $90,000. Again, there have been all sorts of wild swings along the way, but this thing just keeps chugging along. And you can think of that $2 trillion market cap as like a $2 trillion bug bounty. If there was a way to hack this, there's every incentive in the world. And by hack, I mean like to double spend, create basically a counterfeit Bitcoin, I guess would be the way for people to think about it. And
it is a miracle it hasn't been compromised. I think we can all say that.
Well, I don't know if it's a miracle. I think it's exceptional design.
Sure.
And so I think what you could say is that it's been tested in a very robust way, and there's been every incentive to basically break the encryption, and it continues to chug along. And so I think the price has gone up as the protocol has gotten more acceptance. And this is another point, is that Bitcoin's the most widely accepted as a store of value throughout the world.
Yeah.
So we do believe it should be treated special. Now, that being said, we're also creating the digital asset stockpile. So all the other digital assets.
Explain the difference between these two. So there's a digital asset stockpile. That's the picker. And then on the other side, there's a strategic reserve for Bitcoin, because we do acquire Bitcoin, we, the United States of America, when we seize from terrorists, criminals, et cetera. We do seize these. And then we often make the mistake of liquidating them when maybe we should be holding them. Yeah. So explain that architecture.
So we have the reserve and we have the stockpile. So the reserve is just Bitcoin. The goal is long-term preservation. Think of it as like a digital Fort Knox for digital gold. We want to put the digital gold in there. We want to keep it secure. We never want to sell it. That's the goal of the reserve. And you're right that we've made the mistake in the past of selling this stuff. At one point in time, we had about 400,000 Bitcoin on the federal balance sheet. We sold roughly half of that for something like $360 million. Total. If we had held all of that, it would be worth, just that the portion we sold would be worth over $17 billion. So we made this mistake of prematurely selling Bitcoin when we should have held it. We don't want to make that mistake with regard to the rest of it. We think there's around 200,000 coins left on the federal balance sheet, but the truth is that nobody knows because we've never done a proper audit. So part of what this executive order provides is that we're going to do for the first time a government-wide accounting of the digital assets that we actually have. So,
if digital assets emerge in some department, I don't know, the FBI seizes some, the CIA seizes some, I don't know which organization winds up having them, they're going to be legally required to report that and then put them in the reserve.
Well, they'll be legally required to report it, and then they'll go in the reserve if there's a final adjudication. So, obviously, if those coins could go back as restitution to victims, or if the person who they were seized from wins their court case and gets them back, they're not going to go into the Federal Reserve. But if there's been a final adjudication and a final forfeiture, yes, those will go into the reserve. Anyway, that's Bitcoin. Okay, so then you got the stockpile. Let me just talk about that. So first of all, like I said, we don't know exactly what digital assets the federal government has. I've seen reports that it might have, for example, 50,000 ETH, which is Ethereum. But again, we need to get to the bottom of that. When we figure out exactly what the assets are, we're going to move them into the digital stockpile. The purpose of the stockpile is responsible stewardship. It's a place for safekeeping. It's a centralized, you could say, account under the direction of the Secretary of the Treasury. And the Secretary of the Treasury will figure out how to maximize the values of these holdings. Now, there's a couple of important differences between stockpile and reserve. So one is the reserve, the executive order actually provides that the Secretary of the Treasury will not sell the Bitcoin. Okay, we're prohibited from selling the Bitcoin. There's no such prohibition with respect to the stockpile. If the Secretary of the Treasury decides that it's in the long-term interest of the U.S. to rebalance the portfolio or change the portfolio, the Secretary has the discretion to do that.
Okay, which makes sense because there's a long tail of crypto. We might see something that we don't have the ability to predict the future, and we don't have the staff to sit there and look at these assets every day like a fund manager would and say, what do we do with these? What percentage should it be of the overall stockpile, of the overall holdings? So maybe the decision with Ethereum is, hey, this thing's waning. We just put it into Bitcoin because we know that's the more solid one. Yeah, that's what I'm reading into it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's largely fair. I mean, look, I think that the stockpile should be subject to good portfolio management, right?
Excellent.
Unfortunately, we have a Secretary of the Treasury who is an extremely successful former hedge fund manager. So he's going to figure out the best way to manage these assets. And we give him the flexibility to do portfolio management. Whereas,
and
like
he has to live and die with what he does. He has to make those decisions, and that's going to be, part of how he's evaluated by the president. So hopefully he's going to be sharp about that.
Right, but the reserve is different, right? The reserve is just digital Fort Knox. Now, there's one other important difference between stockpile and reserve. So with respect to reserve, the EO provides that the secretaries, that I'm talking about, Treasury and Commerce, they're allowed to figure out strategies to accumulate more Bitcoin for the reserve if those strategies are budget neutral and don't cost the taxpayer anything, okay? So it's possible that we could, I'm not saying that we will, but it authorizes them to acquire more Bitcoin if they can figure out a way to do it that doesn't impact the federal budget or the deficit or taxpayers, right?
Okay, well, I had a very simple suggestion for this, which I'll float up the flagpole here and see what you think. We've talked about it on previous all-ins before you on it. How about a simple crypto tax? Crypto wants to be legal. You're the crypto czar. Crypto wants to be regulated. They want the rules. They want the rails. Simple suggestion from your bestie. Why don't we charge every transaction in the United States 0.01%, just about 1 bit in that native currency? So you want to trade some Solana for Ethereum, for XRP, whatever, put in whatever names you want there. The government says, hey, you want to have a great, vibrant system here? We're going to need to take just the most modest of taxes, de minimis, in fact, in the native crypto and put it in the stockpile. This seems to me like a very
That's always
easy
how
win.
Taxes start, is that they're described as being very modest. When the income tax started, it only applied to like 1,000 Americans.
Yes.
And the legislators swore up and down that it would never be applied to middle-class people. So I don't particularly like the idea of new taxes, even if it's promised that they just won't affect people very much. That sounds burdensome to me. But look, we have very successful...
Well, this would, and just so you know, would be like more like a sales tax that would be handled by Coinbase, would be handled by Robinhood, would be handled by those platforms. They would administer it. It would be a transactional tax, not an income tax. So if you have a bunch, it's not a wealth tax, not a season tax. But I'll let you percolate on it. Yeah.
If you can convince the Secretary of the Commerce or the Secretary of Treasury to run with your idea, then it could potentially happen. I mean, they have the flexibility to figure out budget neutral ways to accumulate Bitcoin. I don't know what those ways are going to be, but they're creative. They're very successful businessmen. And if they figure out a way to do this, then it can be considered. That's the point.
Okay, well, I'll be in the commissary later having lunch with you. You can introduce me. So let me just give you a fastball here. Well, we'll see if it gets in the strike zone. The appearance of impropriety is what people are concerned with. The picking of winners and losers. President Trump was the crypto president. He went and he gave that famous speech. I'm going to get rid of Gary Gensler. We're going to make it legal. And to his credit, he has fulfilled that promise, which means, hey, the donor class on that side said, we're going to back the crypto president, not the anti-crypto team, which means a lot of people who are on the Twitter and the socials have donated a lot. They have a lot of holdings. So this appearance, which you've now, I would give you credit, have cleaned up here. Hey, there's two different things going on here, and we're not using taxpayer money. We get all that. But the appearance here is, hey, maybe somebody's going to benefit. Of course, they came after you first for that without the facts. You were very clear. You cleared all your positions. You sold everything. You divested. So let's make that clear to the dum-dums who are just trying to say that you're personally benefiting
let me
from
address that. Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
please, because
look,
this is ridiculous. Yeah.
well, people came out right away and were saying that somehow I was engaged in a scheme to pump my bags or to basically create exit liquidity for myself and billionaire stuff like that. You have to understand that those accusations, I mean, they're accusing me of a crime. And,
serious crime.
A serious crime. And they're doing it with no evidence whatsoever. So these things are basically, it's borderline slander and defamation.
It's slanderous, yeah, I would say so.
In any event, what they didn't know and what I then proceeded to put out there is that I sold all my cryptocurrency prior to day one of the administration because I didn't want to even have the appearance of a conflict. And by the way, I could have waited. I didn't have to do it like that, but I decided to do it and take it upon myself to do that because you just know that when it comes to crypto, there's going to be a lot of fluctuations in the market. You never want someone to be able to point at one of those fluctuations and say somehow that the cryptos are benefited from that and create a conspiracy theory, which is exactly what basically happened. So first of all, I got rid of all my cryptocurrency prior to day one. Kraft also sold all. And
Kraft is the venture firm that you funded that's done a lot of great work supporting founders here in Silicon Valley.
So we basically sold, I think it was around $200 million of crypto, of which around $85 million was personally attributable to myself. And we cleared that before day one, paid taxes on it, and basically so there wouldn't be a conflict. So then the smear shifted in another direction. It was, okay, well, maybe he doesn't own crypto.
Okay.
But he's in crypto funds. Okay. And so they pointed to, Bitwise and Multicoin Capital. And I was also in Blockchain Capital. And so then the fund managers came out and one by one all said, actually, David called us over 2 months ago and said he's going to need to divest from our funds. And so we also did that. So, I think basically they've kind of given up on this. But look, it's very easy for people.
Why let the facts get in the way of a good slander?
Seriously,
full disclosure, you, when you saw me doing the Sequoia Scouts program, said, hey, why don't you do a fund? I'll be the anchor. I'll be your first LP. And I mean, one of the most generous things you've done in our relationship. And I had to have a call with you, weeks ago and say, hey, okay, you're going to divest. Okay, fine. No problem. No, it's not a problem for me. You sell the assets to somebody else. So the way people understand how this mechanically works, when you're in a fund, you have Sachs cannot tell me what to do in the fund. He just put money in it, like I put money in other people's funds. They go and invest, and 10 years later, you get a return. And hopefully that return in a venture firm or private equity firm beats the markets, the public markets, or whatever. But then you can also sell that interest to somebody else. So mechanically, and this discount, takes time.
At a discount.
And you have to sell it at 50%, 25% off. And it's painful. You will lose, I estimate, you're going to lose, I don't want to be gratuitous here, but 8-9 figures by serving the country for a couple of years. And not only that, the great irony of this is the one thing holding back the industry is regulation, over-regulation of AI, and no clear regulation in crypto. You're going in to fix the two things that were number 1 and 2 on all of our agendas in Silicon Valley in terms of getting returns the next 4 years. So the sacrifice you're making is extraordinary. And you're making it a better environment, a regulated environment for the rest of us to do commerce. So I just want to point out that you're losing like double here.
Right. Well, let me just underscore something you said.
For your service. And I don't know how much they pay. How much are they paying you for this job? What do you get paid? Like 50 grand, 100 grand?
I'm an unpaid consultant to the government.
Really? Is that actually accurate? You get no money?
No, I don't want anything.
Costing you money.
No, of course it is. But it's an honor to serve, and it's an honor to be asked to serve. And in particular, it's an honor to serve this president, because he really wants to make the country great again. So that's why I'm doing it. But yeah, look, I think it's a lazy and stupid narrative to say that the reason why someone who's already successful in business goes into government is to somehow make more money. I was making money before. This involves a substantial disruption of my business interests, and I have to divest a lot of those business interests. And in divesting, I have to be either a taxpayer or I have to take a significant discount, and it costs you money. So,
It's a bummer.
it's just a lazy narrative that people create, but there's no truth to it. And just to underscore a point that you made a second ago, you were one of the funds I divested from, not because you're a crypto fund, but because you might have a crypto position. We went through, I think, the launch fund's holdings, and I think there was something crypto related in there. And
we have one or two that pivoted into crypto, yes.
Right. So I just didn't want to have any problem there. So
listen, this is the nature of the politics we have. People are, it gets very personal. You know that better than anybody. And so, that's why you're here. And hopefully we can clean this all up and let people know that, hey, the intent here is good.
So just to go back to one other point you said about not picking winners and losers, I think that's a very important comment that you made that I see as fundamental to my job. I mean, look, I think we do think that Bitcoin is special for the reasons I said. Beyond that, we do not want to be in the business of picking and choosing winners in the space. And again, if some other digital asset could prove that it's as decentralized and as secure and as widely accepted as a store of value as Bitcoin, then maybe it could be elevated in the same way that Bitcoin has. I mean, I'm laying out the criteria for you. But look, beyond that, we don't want to be picking winners and losers in the space, and that's not my job. I mean, my job is not to be a regulator or to anoint which ones are good or bad. It's to basically be a policy advisor for innovation. And I'll just tell you the way that I see all the digital assets in the space is that what's fundamental is disclosure. If you're an issuer of a digital asset, you need to disclose, all the material facts about what you're doing, and those facts have to be accurate. You can't lie. My view is that if you, the issuer, lie about something, the government should come down on you like a ton of bricks because that's fraud. Okay, but as long as you do this in an honest way, people should be able to trade these things. I understand that you think a lot of them are garbage. You might be right. You could express that view in a trade. But as long as everyone has been above board in terms of disclosure, people should have the right to trade these things. And some are going to make money, some are going to lose money. It's about the freedom to basically to trade, to hold these assets. The government doesn't want to get in the way of that. It just wants to make sure that the information is out there, that it's honest. And if people lie in order to profit, I'm all in favor of going after them.
Well, and, we already have a regulated market as an analogy. And when you tell a lie and you sell a share in a company, whether it's a private or a public company, the SEC has a term for that. It's called securities fraud. And we, have this new type of device. It's very innovative. It could be an NFT. It could be a trading card. It could be an actual utility token where you burn it in use of a service, or it could be anything. It could be whatever the person describes it as. But what's important is there's an entity with a group of people, I think you would agree, who have said, we have ownership of this. We're incorporated here in the United States, not in Panama, not in the BVI, not in some, other place where maybe they're a little faster or looser with regulations. You got to be here in the US. Maybe you have to be insured in some way. Maybe there has to be a board like there does in Delaware or in an LLC. There has to be some person where the buck stops. And if you lie while committing a transaction or taking money for an asset, it would be securities fraud. And yes, people will come down on you like a ton of bricks. And if you promote things and you don't disclose it, well, we have rules about that as well. We saw many celebrities get pinched last time for tweeting about cryptocurrencies. And this is the stuff that I think has to stop. I think it should feel more like what we do in angel investing in the private companies and in public companies. So that's your job. When are we going to see, that framework emerge? Because here, you're only like 40, 50 days into this, I think. When will we see the actual bones of a framework? So if I want to do J-Coin and I want to make an angel investing coin, or I want to do something fun, an NFT collection for all in or something, when will we have the actual rules of the road? And that's going to be multiple agencies, right?
Yeah. What you're describing is known in Washington, or the area of policy that you're describing is known as market structure. And market structure is about providing a clear framework for market participants. It would define what is a security, what's a commodity, what's simply a collectible, it's just property, but it's not a security. And then what are the rules for each category? That's known as market structure. There is a bill that passed the last Congress in the House, but Biden basically, he didn't veto it, but he basically, he and the Democrats stopped it. He stopped it in the Senate, the Democrats did. It was called FIT 21. And it was authored by French Hill, who's now the chairman of the House Financial Services Committee. So we expect that he will be introducing a new version of his bill probably in the next few weeks. I don't think I'm breaking any news by saying this. I think people expect it. And that's going to provide the framework for market structure. And it's going to provide a lot of the definitions that you're talking about. Now, I agree with your sentiment, okay, but I will say that I might have a different view than you of what is a security, what's not. I mean, to me, collectibles are not securities, but if it's a collectible, you got to disclaim that, look, this has no intrinsic value, right? That's a collectible. Think about a baseball card. A baseball card is a piece of cardboard. It has no intrinsic value, but the value comes from basically other collectors being willing to buy it from you. And you could just say that that's irrational or whatever. But so look, I think as long as people disclaim that this coin has no intrinsic value, they should be able to issue meme coins. It's a separate question why people would want to buy them. But look, in my view, that's very different than someone who goes out as an issuer and says, I'm issuing a token or a coin that has lots of functionality and has lots of value. And you'll hear some of these guys even say that, hey, our token is more valuable than Bitcoin. You should value it more highly. Well, if you're promising that and you're saying that it's going to have certain functionality, you better be telling the truth about it.
Yeah, again, then we start getting into the Howey test, and people can go look that up if they want. What I will say is there's an educational process that has to come in here, which we've gone through as the United States. When people would buy interest in mines, people would buy interest in gold claims, oil fields, and that's when a lot of these regulations came out in the 20s around accreditation. We've spoken about this before. It's a pet peeve of mine, but I think there should be an educational framework here. And I think there should also be some nuance that you could work on specifically with this group of being clear that when you have a ticker symbol associated with something, or you do charts associated with something, it starts to smell like a duck. It looks like a duck. It's quacking like a duck. But then in the terms of service, it says, hey, this is a collectible. I think there needs to be some ground rules, which maybe it says, hey, these need to be presented in a certain way at the top level. So the nuance of disclosure is so important. When I tweet something, if it was an advertiser or a sponsor of All In or This Week in Startups or any influencer, or you would you do this, and you said, I love, this brand. You and I both you were an investor in 8 Sleep IM. If we were to tweet about that, as investors, we don't have to disclose. But if we were paid for that, the FTC has rules. You have to put, this is a paid partnership. You cannot confuse consumers. And I think that's where you're going to have to do a little bit of cleanup work and structure as well, is the disclosure and how this appears. And then also maybe the educational system. So, if you want to own a firearm, if you want to drive a car, if you want to be, a beautician, and listen, we can talk about overregulation, you got to take tests. Man, it would just be so much better if consumers could take, like a 50-question test just to say, hey, they understand what we're talking about here in terms of diversification, so they don't YOLO their entire mortgage and house into one crypto. So what are your thoughts on those two issues? Disclosures, how it's presented, and then accreditation, and maybe a path to accreditation, sophisticated investor test is how I refer to it, for all Americans, because 90% of people can't participate in private companies. Your thoughts?
Well, disclosure is the key. Like I said, I mean, these projects should have to disclose certain things. I think, for example, the token cap table should be disclosed. Who are the insiders? How much do they have? When are they selling? That's information the market should always know, in my opinion.
And easily done with the technology lauded by the crypto community, the blockchain. This could just be on the blockchain. This was always the problem we had as venture capitalists with, hey, this is a token project. Who owns the tokens? Where are they? When can I sell? When can you sell? The insiders, yes.
Yeah, I don't think you have to disclose everyone who owns a token. That could be hard to comply with, but I think you should have to disclose. 5%, you should have to disclose 1%. The insiders and their sales plans and their lockups, and I would also say how new tokens get created. I mean, if this is a fully centralized token where they can just mint more, people need to know that because there's no scarcity, right? But if there's somehow an enforcement mechanism and there's enforced scarcity, then that's a different story. So yeah, these things have to be disclosed. And by the way, I think the market structure bills will do that. There's a version of this in FIT 21 last Congress. I think it'll be in the next one. And moreover, the SEC is looking right now at these rules and they're going to create their own frameworks. They're doing an excellent job.
Who's the new SEC chief? I was doing some research on him. He's a really pro, actually, more Americans being able to invest in private equity, et cetera. And he's given speeches on it in the past.
So the person who's been nominated for the new chair of the SEC is named Paul Atkins, and he has not been confirmed yet. The confirmation hearings still need to happen. Separately, Hester Peirce, who's a commissioner at the SEC, is in charge of...
I know Hester. I've had her on This Week in Startups a couple of times. She's great.
She's excellent. She's very well informed, and she's very sharp, taking the lead on all the crypto-related stuff. So I
Okay.
trust her and I trust the SEC to produce those detailed frameworks that you're talking about.
Yeah.
I think that my role as, call it, innovation policy advisor is just to kind of make sure that we have the big picture right. And I'm very confident that the SEC, the CFTC, and the legislators are going to figure out the balance here.
Sachs, you got to go. Really proud of the work here. Congratulations on cleaning this all up and presenting a really thoughtful plan that we can all ask you hard questions on. Appreciate you taking the hard questions here on the All In
anytime.
podcast. And good luck when you do the rest of the media circus. I wonder if I'm going to be the hardest questioner of you.
I hope so.
And for people asking, yes, I'm wearing a suit because I am now joining the administration. Big announcement. I'm the official podcaster, the official moderator of the Trump White House. I'm just kidding.
People will actually believe you. All right, man. Listen, I
They
got
will.
to
They
hop.
will.
I got to
With the
hop.
jokes.
But good
Gotta
to see
go.
you.
All right.
Okay.
Love you, brother. We'll see you
Okay.
soon. Cheers.
All right. Bye.
All right, everybody. I'm obviously super conflicted. Sachs is my friend of 20 years plus. We're partners here on the All In podcast. And of course, I'm rooting for the administration. But, I got that journalist blood in me. I always want to call balls and strikes. I'm going to, as you just heard, ask hard questions. So if you're wondering where I'm coming from, I'm going to ask hard questions to my friends because they're doing important work for the American people and for the rest of the people on the planet, candidly. These are important decisions that Sachs is going to have to make about crypto, AI, that Elon's making with DOGE. I'm going to ask hard questions. That's the way it's going to be. And so I'm really excited that they're coming on here. They're going to take the hard questions from me, but they're done in a certain spirit, which is, yes, they're my friends, but they got important jobs. So they do have to answer the hard questions for the American people. And I'm also curious, and we're all curious where they're coming from. So I feel so privileged that they're choosing to come on All In to face those hard questions. We'll see you all next time on the All In podcast.
We'll let your winners ride.
Rain Man David Sachs.
And instead, we open source it to the fans, and they've just gone crazy with it.
Love you, Besties. The Queen of Quinoa. Besties are back.
Gold 13th. That's my dog taking a notice in your driveway.
Oh, man.
My haberdasher will meet me at Wynn's. We should all just get a room and just have one big huge orgy because they're all just useless. It's like this sexual tension that they just need to release somehow.
Wet your beak. Wet your
Wet your feet.
beak.
Wet
That's gonna be good. We need to get merch.
Besties are back.
Going all in.